Hey, good afternoon again. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we need to start. Okay. Welcome to the board's January 29th to 30th, 2020 board meeting. I'm Greg Lippy, president of the board. As I call the meeting to order, I advise all members of the public, both present or watching the meeting's webcast, that the board is a consumer protection agency subject to the Open Meetings Act. The board's strategic plan establishes standing committees through which the board establishes its goals and organizes its activities. Each of these committees is comprised of public and licensee members. The committee structure provides an important venue for ensuring staff and members share information in crafting and implementing objectives. These meetings also provide an opportunity for stakeholder involvement, and public comment is encouraged. Following committee meetings, the chairs from each of the respective committees provide reports to the full board as part of board meetings. Committee recommendations on policy decisions are referred to the full board as the final decision maker. As included on the agenda during this meeting, the board will receive reports from the chairpersons of several of the board's committees. The meetings being webcast. We respectfully request that when called upon to speak, please come to the speaker's table and speak directly into the microphone. This will ensure that those individuals watching the webcast are aware of all discussions and actions. As indicated on the agenda, the board has a significant number of items for consideration. Items may be taken out of order. If necessary, I may impose time frames for public comment on the various agenda items, which may be limited to a specified period of time. We respectfully request that individuals providing public comment be respectful of board members' time and refrain from restating comments previously considered by members of the board, whether those comments occurred during the committee meeting or during this meeting. Further, please refrain from discussing pending complaints, pending applications, or pending disciplinary actions that may come before the board for a decision. Thank you in advance for your consideration and cooperation. I thank you all for attending. I look forward to a productive meeting. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to make a few additional announcements. Last week, the board appointed Ann Sodergren as the board's executive officer. So we can trash that word interim. In addition, during our December meeting, it was suggested that the board establish an ad hoc committee to review existing regulations for necessity and identify opportunities for improvement. As president, I directed staff to complete some preliminary work to enable the committee to begin its work in the coming months. I will now take a roll call, beginning on my left.
Ricardo Sanchez, public member.
Alan Shad, professional member.
Maria Serpa, professional member.
Greg Lippy, public member.
Labanza Butler, professional member.
Ryan Brooks, public member.
Shirley Kim, public member.
Debbie Veal, professional member.
Albert Wong, professional member.
Okay. We have established our quorum. Okay, members. You all listening? I'm pleased to invite Kimberly Kirkmeyer, Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs, to provide the board with an update. This agenda item is being taken out of order. Should it be helpful, the agenda lists this item as number 13. I want to give her a chance to get on the airplane fast.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, good afternoon. I'm President Lippy, members, and Executive Officer Sodergren. It is a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Kimberly Kirkmeyer. Can't even say my own last name. I'm the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs, and thank you for this opportunity to really introduce myself. And since this is kind of the first meeting in this role in front of you all, I want to give you kind of what my goals are while I'm the director, and just some things that I will be working on. Some of them I think that will impact all of you as well. And so so I'm happy to share those with you. But before I get started, I would like to actually congratulate Ms. Sodergren on her appointment to the Executive Officer of the Board. It's been a pleasure working with Ms. Sodergren while she served as the Interim Executive Officer and as prior to that as the Assistant Executive Officer. And I really look forward to working with her in the future in her official capacity now. So congratulations, Anne. So it's an honor to be appointed by Governor Newsom to serve as the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs. For most of you, you may know those that I've been coming to talk to you and previously as my role at the Medical Board. DCA has really been my home. I actually started there as a student assistant about 30 years ago when I was 5, and been working there ever since. I wish I was 5, but the department really has been my home the entire career, and I really look forward to working with the currently Agent Secretary Podesta and all the boards and bureaus to improve consumer protection in California. Just a little bit about my background. I did actually really did start as a student assistant back with a different board under the Department of Consumer Affairs, and after a while there at that board, I actually took a position in the enforcement unit over at the Medical Board, where I served for almost 20 years in various positions at that board. I've done licensing, I've done enforcement, done a lot within each different unit under the Department of Consumer Affairs. So I really have a background in what needs to be done and hopefully what can be done at the boards and bureaus. When I was at that board, I actually got a governor appointment under Governor Schwarzenegger back to the Department of Consumer Affairs, where I was the Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Services for a short time, and then actually came back to the Medical Board. And right after I came back, I was appointed as the Executive Director there, and it was great. I want to further the communication that happens between boards, and I think it was really beneficial for the Medical Board to really work with the Board of Pharmacy back and forth, and we're going to continue that. I know in the individuals who are at the Medical Board right now, but I want to really expand that as well with other boards that may need to interact on mutual interests. So that's one of the things I will be working at as well, but I think we were kind of one of the starting boards to do that back and forth, so hopefully we can continue that. I sent an email out actually to all of the department employees and just went over my main initial focuses, and I just wanted to share those with you. My main focus when I get, while I'm there, is really client services and satisfaction. I think every position within the department really plays a critical role in providing efficient quality services to the boards and bureaus so they can meet their mission of consumer protection, and I think it's very important that we are providing the services that you all need in order to meet that mission, and you can't do it without the services that we provide, and we can't do it without the boards and bureaus, so we need to work together. Working together smarter, that is another goal. We have a lot of talent in our department, and I think there can be more creative collaboration between the boards and bureaus, and I think we can actually change the way we do business if we look at best practices amongst a lot of the boards and bureaus and using great tools and teams and technology. So data transparency and action, I want to use data and technology to better inform our decision making, so action plans are developed to drive down the licensing and enforcement timelines. But also one of the goals for me at the department, really, we've always asked the boards and bureaus to provide information on how long does it take to license and how long does it take to do the enforcement process, and you all have to report that before the legislature, but I really want to delve into how long does it take to process a personnel package, how long does it take to do a regulation, how long does it take to do a contract, so we can put some metrics in there so we can kind of measure the work that we're doing so we can enhance it and find efficiencies and streamline our processes. So with all of those top level things in mind, the areas that I'm really going to be focusing on is the time frame for processing regulations. I know that this has impacted this board, it's impacted a lot of the boards, and we really need to bring that timeline down so you can implement the laws that the legislature have given to you, and so we want to make sure that we do that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Also obtaining fiscal reports. It's really hard for a board to know how much they need and how much their licensing fees should be without knowing what their revenue and expenditures are. And so that's something that I'm going to be looking at. And I do have a little bit more information on that as well and some positive things in that venue. Also decreasing the time frame it takes to perform investigations. I know this is a little bit outside of the Board of Pharmacy because you have your own pharmacy inspectors, but when you do have to send things to the Division of Investigation, I want to make sure that we're doing that as efficiently and as quickly as possible. And a lot of arenas for other boards, those individuals are practicing during that time that the investigation is ongoing, so it only improves consumer protection to speed up that process. Working on ADA compliance issues is another thing because we have to have all of our websites and all of our documents ADA compliant, and that'll be a big lift, but I think we can do it if we work together. And then the last thing is really ensuring that legislation that is implemented, that is actually passed, is then implemented by the boards and bureaus. I think it's important that we put together some kind of tracking and make sure that it is actually implemented when it passes, but then also going back and making sure that laws that have passed are actually implemented already. And so that's something I'll be working with our Legislative Affairs Office on. But with that, just going in the mind of keeping the importance of department-wide collaboration, I actually held my first Directors Quarterly meeting back on December 16th. We actually had a great turnout and a lot of robust discussions. We had discussions from the department, the Business and Consumer Services Housing Agency Deputy Secretary Layla Marashidi, who spoke on board appointments, and so I know that's always something that's so important to all of the boards. We also had a presentation on AB 2138 implementation that was provided by the Senior Assistant Attorneys General from the Department of Justice, and then we really just went over some DCA initiatives and things that really we can work together on. And I'm going to be looking to really be holding one-on-one meetings with all of the DCA boards and bureaus to learn more about their goals and then also issues that each are facing and where we can work together. However, as some of you may know, the department still has several vacant positions. I think I have about 6 vacant positions, so in appointed areas, and so I'm going to be looking to hopefully obtain a chief deputy director, and we have several deputy directors who are vacant. So as soon as those individuals get on board and I actually have my executive team, then I'll be reaching out to meet with Ms. Sodergren and then Mr. Lippy and kind of going over your issues. So, as you may be aware, the Department of Consumer Affairs Legal Office created a regulations unit to directly assist in the processing of departmental rulemaking proposals. In November, that regulation unit finally became fully staffed. They had just been implemented in July, and so they got it fully staffed in November. And all of the DCA programs have been assigned a regulation attorney who will act as an assigned reviewer of proposed rulemaking packages. A large priority, obviously, of the regulation unit so far has been implementing AB 2138 because we have 38 different regulation packages that we need to get through to get all the way through the process, hopefully meeting the implementation date of July 1 deadline. And so we have a lot of packages in various stages of that process, including yours as well. Then another step that they're actually taking to improve transparency and efficiency is in processing regulations and using Sharewell. It's a data system that will track the regulation submissions and their progress so that actually the programs can monitor where they are, and then you'll know exactly the step that regulation package is in. We're working on the development of it, and I'm looking forward to providing additional updates in the future as we move forward. We're hoping for a rollout early this year. And then I'd also like to thank Ms. Sodergren for her work on that because I know she was helped implement that and kind of was a pilot program with your regulations. The DCA's budget office and actually the Office of Information Services are in a testing phase of a project that's going to allow us to access budget expenditure reports on a similar schedule and similar to the level of detail that we've had with the previous CalSTARS reports. So we're actually utilizing data that we're getting from the FisCal system and moving it over into our Cognos, which is a system that uses to run reports, and QBIRD is what it's called from the Breeze system, and that we will be able to get a monthly view of program expenditures compared against budgets. The plan is to release the new reports hopefully early this year for 1920, and then eventually these reports will be able to be run on as on-demand need by the board, so you'll be able to go in and run them on their own. In the past, we've always had to wait till like the 15th to run the report, but this will allow the boards to go back and look at old expenditures. That revenue reporting efforts has to wait, though we actually have to wait until we get the month closed before we could run those reports. So that's another thing that we're doing, and hopefully those reports will be done. I know that this is a sunset year for your board, so while 2020 sunset hearings have not been scheduled yet, please know that the department will remain committed to offering your board support in preparing for these hearings. We will continue to communicate with 2020 sunset programs as we receive more information, and additionally, we're going to be setting up meetings with all of the programs with agency to talk about the sunset review and just to discuss any issues in any way that we can help prepare for the hearing. And if the board wants to go through a mock hearing, we're willing to provide that as well. We've identified dates for our 2020 board member orientation training. The first is going to take place March 25th, 2020 in Sacramento. And then we're also going to be hosting one in June in Southern California and then back in October in Sacramento. The one here in Southern California, I know the last time it was offered, it was in Riverside area, which we heard a lot of complaints from LA members. It's really tough to get there. I completely understand that. Freeway is not fun at all. And so we're looking to host it somewhere here actually in the LA area. To where it'll be closer. So all members who are either newly appointed or reappointed have to take that training within 1 year. So please make sure that you get signed up for those programs. 2019 was a mandatory sexual harassment prevention training year. So this means that all of the employees and board members had to complete that training in that last year. If you have not done so, I don't know if any of the members here have not done so, but if you have not, please make sure that you get that done as soon as possible so we're compliant with that. We actually had a huge turnout this year. I think we were like 98% compliant. So, and most of the non-compliant were committee and board members. So we were really lucky to get everybody in. And then finally, as far as training, I do want to remind you that the Form 700s are going to be due on April 1st. Under the conflict of interest regulations, all of the board members are designated appointees and have to complete that. I know it's always fun that time of year to make sure you collected everything for the last year. And you're required to file even if you have nothing to report. And if you need any help, we have an individual in our Office of Human Resources that's available, and also in Legal Affairs. They can also give you information if you have any questions about filing requirements. And then the last thing I just want to pass on and talk about, and this is something I didn't actually take the opportunity to take advantage of when I was at the medical board, and that's why I've become focused to talk about this at all of the boards, because now looking back, I really am kicking myself because I didn't utilize it. And that is actually the department's Organizational Improvement Office, or OIO we call it. This provides DCA programs change management services and business process mapping and information technology system requirement documentation. They also provide collaborative consulting on process reengineering that maximizes utilization of existing resources, improves productivity, increases quality. They actually have two kind of sets of documents that they're working on right now. And the first one that they were asked to do is a review of DCA's centralized services. So they've actually already conducted a review of the legal affairs division and that process. Right now, they just completed one with the Division of Investigation, and that's going to be coming out within the next month. And so there's several improvements in both of those recommendations and reports in those reviews that we're going to be implementing. And then they're working on the Office of Information Services help desk, as well as Office of Human Resources. So that's the next one they're going into. So that's with our DCA Central Services. And then they're also working with 9 boards and bureaus to document and analyze their processes as they get ready to streamline their procedures going into the development of IT systems. So again, thank you for this opportunity to present to your board, and I'd like to thank you for having me here today and all of your commitment for the board. I can't tell you, I know that this is definitely we call it a volunteer service. Your $100 a day does not pay for any of the hard work and dedication that you put into this job, and I really just want to thank you for your service to the state of California. So that includes my update, and I'm here for any questions that you may have.
Members, do you have any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
And I hope you get to the airport on time. Okay. Next, public comments on items not on the agenda. These would be agenda items for future meetings. Do we have any? Danny?
Good afternoon, board members. Danny Martinez with the California Pharmacists Association. Right now, you're being passed out a letter coming from our office regarding the CPJE testing dates that have been released. This is coming from a colleague of mine in our office, so I, with your permission, Mr. President, I'd just like to quickly read this through. Recently, the California Board of Pharmacy released the remainder of the CPJE dates for 2020. We appreciate the board's work in ensuring availability of future dates with ample time for candidates to plan and schedule for the CPJE. As the 2020 cohort of PharmD graduates are preparing for the start of their careers with staff pharmacists, postgraduate residency, and fellowship positions, the current allotment of examination dates presents some challenges. Given the timeline of this 2019 CPJE issue, there were many instances of pharmacists not being able to meet their contractual obligations by of being licensed by specific fall deadlines, thus unable to deliver care to their patients. Previous experience with the board's protocol for processing pharmacist applications, which are based on the batch applications received from pharmacy programs and notifying the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy to release the authorization to test, which allow pharmacists to schedule examination dates, has ranged from late June to mid-July. The release of these ATTs at this time would result in the earliest 2020 PharmD graduates being eligible to sit for the CPJE, the July examination block, with majority of the examinees being able to test in the August schedule block. As far as the availability of the exam results on average, it takes roughly 30 days after candidates take the test for the board to mail their scores. If this same process continues to be followed, those taking the exam in July would receive their results in August, with pharmacist licenses being approved and released by September at best. However, if a candidate does not pass the CPJE during this time, the board's procedure for applicants to retake the CPJE calls for 30 days to process the application. Based on this information, candidates will not have an opportunity to retest and meet their employer contracts or national residency standards to be licensed within 90 days of their start date. We're respectfully requesting that the board ensures that applications for the examination are processed in a timely manner to facilitate the earlier June and July exam dates and for adequate testing center availability during these higher demand dates for candidates. We would also respectfully request for additional examination dates be made available in September of 2020 to allow for reasonable testing availability and licensure opportunities for pharmacists entering the profession to practice in California. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else? Please come up.
Hello. My name's Sandra LeVay, and I'm representing the people. I want to thank you, the board members, for your time and for giving me the opportunity to present my request.
Yeah.
Is that better?
That's better.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for allowing me to be here. Until November of 2019, we, the citizens of California, had access to a wide variety of sterile compounded products. At that time, a decision was made which drastically limited their supply. Having access to sterile compounded products is important to individuals with illnesses who do not respond well to or tolerate conventional treatment. Compounded products are also important for use as adjunctive therapies, improving the outcome. In November of 2019, a decision was made to enforce the recently modified suggested federal compound guidelines. As a consequence, sterile compounds and products such as glutathione, alpha-lipoic acid, phosphatidylcholine, MSM, and many others were unavailable. Healthcare providers found themselves scrambling to find alternate sources and other therapies which were less effective but might still assist their patients. The sterile compounds in question are useful for a wide variety of symptoms, including chronic inflammation and pain, head trauma, liver dysfunction, and more. They are also useful in treating addiction. As adjunctive therapy, these sterile compounds can enhance the treatment of chronic infections, provide support for cardiac treatment, and diminish the many side effects of chemotherapy. Alpha-lipoic is a compound that I require. When it became unavailable in California, I was faced with difficult decisions. I had to decide whether to give up on my treatment plan, move out of state, or commute out of state to receive my infusions. Sorry. My decision was to travel out of state every other week for 3 days. I hoped that would be sufficient because my treatment plan calls for 2 infusions per week. I found an out-of-state doctor and set up my appointments. Fortunately, in January of this year, alpha-lipoic acid became available again in California. I am extremely grateful to the board for that positive change, but I'm concerned about the future. This was a tremendous wake-up call for me. Many other people haven't shared my good fortune, and their compounds remain unavailable. They continue to suffer in pain and in physical and emotional distress because what they need is simply not available here in the state of California. I know that something must be done to ensure that people have access to the compounds that they need and that access to these compounds is protected in the future as well. I come here before you with other patients and members of the medical community to urge you to consider our situation when making decisions that will limit access to compounded products that we rely on for our health and well-being. I ask you to reverse or modify the decisions that led to the situation in which we currently find ourselves. I ask you to please keep in mind that legislation and policies that limit the ability of compounding pharmacies to produce sterile and non-sterile compounded products negatively impacts the doctors and clinics that provide our care. I ask that you keep in mind that limiting their choices of therapy for us creates needless suffering and has a direct negative effect on our health and quality of life. Members of the board, I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jill Simonian, and I'm going to bring up a brand new subject, cannabis. I have been working towards the advancement of cannabis and cannabinoid education, particularly for our healthcare professionals. This March, I will be teaching the very first cannabinoid pharmacology class at the UCSD Skaggs School of Pharmacy. As you all know, probably, there are now 33 states which have legalized the use of cannabis for medical purposes, and 10 states, or 11 with the District of Columbia, which allow for recreational use, including California. Despite these state regulations and the fact that millions of Americans are using cannabis for medical purposes, including CBD, for alternative and complementary therapies, there still remains virtually no education for our healthcare professionals. I believe that the state of California, which is a leader state in this country, should be at the forefront of this industry. And as public servants, pharmacists have a responsibility to provide education to our communities, to our patients, as well as safeguarding them with proper information about potential benefits as well as harms of cannabis. We should be working together to establish policy and position statements with regard to labeling recommendations, safe institutional practices, and mandatory clinical education. There are now currently 5 states that mandate pharmacists' involvement in medical cannabis dispensing. I would like to ask for your consideration to start in allowing me to deliver a presentation at one of your meetings on this subject, which would include cannabinoid pharmacology, therapeutics, and current regulations across this nation. Thank you.
Thank you. And your last name reminds me of something. We have 2 former presidents of the board here with us today, Rafi Simonian and Stan Goldenberg. Can you stand and be recognized? Thank you. Now, you just made my job easy. I was looking for my notes.
Yeah, I was giving you some time. My name is Mark Chu. I'm the pharmacist for Orange County EMS, and I'm going to start off with just give you a little I guess kudos. I was, as a CalMat pharmacist at the Kincaid Fire, and just your bulletins that went out about the waivers and the refilling of the prescriptions, that helped tremendously. There are still pharmacists out there who don't read them, unfortunately. But kudos to Safeway, Save-On, and CVS. Oh, excuse me, Walgreens and CVS. They all seem to know what's going on when we had to call them for refills. The second item I wanted to bring up is, as a planner for emergency preparedness, one of the things we look at is bioterrorism events, anthrax, brucellosis, and that type of stuff. And during our planning phases, we've come across a little hurdle. The FDA and the CDC have put out instructions for the public how to crush doxycycline tablets to be able to give it to people, children, adults who can't swallow pills. So during the planning phase, the question came up, why can't the pharmacists do it? Well, now we have a compounding regulation that keeps us from doing that. But I said, maybe the disaster statement allows the pharmacists to do that. And in the disaster statement, it doesn't quite say that. It says, other standard pharmacy practices and duties. But prior to 2006, those of us who've been around a while, it was a standard of practice, but now it's not. So I just thought I'd bring that point to the board, that regulations may be conflicting with the FDA and the CDC.
Thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Sure. Is that appropriate? Or no?
Just about the agenda item. If you're just trying to clarify what the issue is and to decide
trying to
whether
clarify
put
his
it
comment.
on a future agenda,
The issue regarding doxycycline crushing and compounding, is that solely because it's on the recommended anti-whatever list for disasters, or is it because it's a hazardous product under USP 800?
No, it's under the providing patient care. It's just to address those patients who can't swallow tablets. That's all it is.
But are you, do you know if doxycycline is under USP 800 as a hazardous product?
No.
It's not, or you don't know?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't check that out.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, anybody else? Nope. All right, next. Okay, next would be approval of the November board minutes.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to approve both.
Before you do, I want to mention something. I provided edits to staff on the sunset portion of those minutes. A number of changes have been made since these were distributed. Did we have copies to? I have copies to give to everybody. Have they been passed out?
Yes.
Okay. Have you had a chance to look at those changes? Well, I guess they're not actually substantive, but there were quite a few. There were some sentences that you couldn't complete and that weren't completed.
Sure. I mean, if there are substantive changes, I think it's worth us to look
Yeah.
at. If there are structural changes
Yeah.
that were made, I'm okay with approving the minutes as is.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know how the rest of the board feels about that.
That's basically it. So I just wanted you to know that I made a number of changes before they got before today. So you're okay at this point? Now you
I
can.
second Debbie Bill's
Okay.
motion.
Okay. All those in favor
Actually, my motion was for both sets of minutes.
for both November and December? Okay. Is your second for both as well? Okay. All those in favor, raise your hand.
Public
Me?
comment, please.
Public comment on the minutes. Thank you. Okay, they're approved. Moving right along. Next, we have recognition and celebration of pharmacists licensed in California for 40 years. We do have one, and her name is Helen Mizrahi Jonah, and I would like her to come up. And do we have the... I'll be right there. I'm coming to you. Usually we have kind of an easier way. So, congratulations.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's actually not 40 years of service, it's 51. When I graduated at SE with my doctorate of pharmacy, there were 108 graduates, of which 5 were women. That was the face of pharmacy in those days. It's changed, but our dedication to public service, public health, public welfare remains the same. We were very involved in those days. I don't know if the younger pharmacists have the time today to do what we did. We were involved in emergency preparedness, in the drills. We were involved with Doctors Without Borders. We collected medical supplies and medication for relief countries that needed those supplies. We were very, very involved outside of our profession. I don't need to tell you what a pharmacist does besides dispensing medication, the consultation, making sure that everybody takes their medication properly, consulting with doctors to make sure that there is no complication with other drugs that are taken. I think my major role I found was to talk to doctors about cutting down on older patients taking too many medications, and that was my major role. So that's basically mostly about me.
What would your advice be to new pharmacists starting out? What would your advice be to new pharmacists starting out today?
It's common sense. I mean, we're all dedicated to the public to make sure that for public health and welfare. Yeah.
Okay. And what was your favorite part of being a pharmacist?
Well, I loved working in independent pharmacies. I have to say, I almost pity the pharmacists that have to work for all the chains. I have to tell you.
With that, okay. Okay, the first report today is under the purview of the Organizational Development Committee. It's agenda item 5, and I'm going to give it because I'm one of the 2 members of the Organizational Development Committee. Starting with a report on our budget. As indicated in the meeting materials, fiscal year-end figures are not yet available for 2017-18 and 2018-19. Also, previously reported, as included in the meeting materials, the board's authorized expenditures for the current fiscal year are about $26 million, about an 11% increase from the prior year. Preliminary revenue details indicated that the board has received over $13 million thus far and has expended about $10.5 million. As detailed in the chair report, the board's fund condition reports a gradual increase in its months in reserve, with the new fees taking effect April 1, 2020. Are there any member comments on the budget report? Okay, any public comments? Stan? Rafi? Stan and Rafi?
Stan Goldenberg, past president, Board of Pharmacy.
Rafi Simonian, past president, Board of Pharmacy.
Both Rafi and I just want to congratulate Ann on moving into the executive officer position on behalf of not only ourselves, but all the past presidents of the boards of pharmacy. All the best luck to you.
And I want to praise the wisdom of the board for putting Ann in there, because I met Ann when she became the associate executive officer, and when I met Ginny Harold for the first time, she was the associate executive officer. I never thought anyone could improve on Ginny Harold's associate executive officer position until Ann showed up. And she's an amazing individual, extremely bright, hardworking, very reasonable, and those are characteristics that are going to serve the board well in the continuity as we come in 2020 to make the board to even a higher level. So I want to personally say my thanks. I've worked with her personally many times as a pharmacist and pharmacist in charge, an extremely effective leader, and she's going to take the board to greater heights than you could ever expect.
Well, I want to tell you that the current president agrees with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is board member attendance information. Attachment 2 includes a summary of board member attendance for the 6 months of the fiscal year. Thank you, members, for your commitment to the board and its mission. Are there any comments by the members? Any comments by the public? Moving along, personnel update. Information on vacant positions is included in the chair report. With the permanent appointment of the executive officer, I would expect recruitment for the assistant executive officer to resume quickly. We look forward to updates on that recruitment as it moves forward. Any member comments? Public comments? Okay, next, board and committee meeting calendar for 2020. The last item of the Organizational Development Committee report is the schedule of meeting dates for the remainder of the calendar year. You will note that some meeting dates have changed to reflect the preference of board members. Our next meeting is scheduled for March 12, 2020 at Keck Graduate Institute School of Pharmacy. Additional changes to the schedule include the May meeting, which is now scheduled for May 6 to 7th, 2020, and the petitioner meetings now scheduled for June 18th, 2020, September 17th, 2020, and December 3rd, 2020. Are there any member comments? Any public comments? Okay, next is licensing committee report, and I will now turn the meeting over to Debbie Veal to provide the report on the license committee activities, which is agenda item 6. Debbie?
Thank you. Let's see. So first I want to acknowledge who the licensing committee members are. The vice chair is Lavanza Cheryl Butler. Alan Shadd and Albert Wong. So thank you guys for your wise guidance at our meetings. Let's see, the first item is has to do with a discussion and consideration of implementation of recently enacted legislation, SB 159, related to HIV pre- and post-exposure prophylaxis, including possible adoption of emergency regulation and initiation of the regular rulemaking related to the development of the training program. So just as background, SB 159 establishes the authority for pharmacists to furnish pre- and post-exposure prophylaxis in specified amounts under specific conditions, including that the pharmacist has determined that the patient meets a clinical criteria consistent with the federal guidelines. The legislation provided that prior to the pharmacist furnishing the pre- or post-exposure prophylaxis, a pharmacist must complete a training program approved by the board in consultation with the medical board and on use of the pre- and post-exposure prophylaxis. Further, the statute identifies specific areas that must be covered in the training program, including financial assistance program and CDC guidelines. During the November 2019 board meeting, the board discussed the provisions of SB 159, including the statutory provisions requiring the board to adopt emergency regulation by July 1st, 2020. The board referred the development of these regulations to the licensing committee. Since that time, the licensing committee has had 2 meetings to discuss legislation and regulations necessary to define the training program requirements. During these meetings, members have received public comment from the experts from the Office of AIDS, the Department of Healthcare Services, pharmacists currently providing treatment, and other stakeholders. The committee has also reviewed relevant material, including underlying statute, CDC guidelines referenced in the statute, and resources provided by the Office of AIDS, and sample fact sheets. As I reviewed the committee work and recommendations, I want to note that the committee will be offering a recommendation for the board's consideration. In addition, subsequent to the committee's second meeting, 2 additional issues were identified that required the board's consideration and, if appropriate, action. As a committee, we have remained focused on the intent of SB 159 was to reduce barriers to access for these medications and ensuring that the regulations themselves did not create a barrier. So let me kind of repeat that. The purpose of 159 is about access. So enabling people who are interested in pre or post medication to have access to them. And we had a number of people testify about that is a huge problem in the state. In certain areas in the state, a bigger problem than other areas, but that is the purpose of 159, and so that's what we have to focus on as we look at this regulation and create the training program. The committee noted the significant but limited role the pharmacists will have under the provision and need to be mindful to balance the improved access to medication while balancing consumer protection. The committee was reminded that access points in community pharmacies are critical to save lives and reduce the spread of HIV, as well as essential needed to start PEP within the narrow window of exposure. During our first meeting, the public comment ranged quite significantly regarding the number of hours of the training program, ranging from 1 to 2 hours to 5 or 7 or even more. As a committee, we expressed concern given the provision of the bill, once again, that the intent was access. We noted that the regulation should establish minimum training requirements, trusting a pharmacist as a licensed professional to seek out additional training if he or she determined he or she needed it. In addition to the duration of training during the first meeting, the committee also received significant input on topics that should be covered. Such topics included information on the provision of the statute, information on HIV, sexually transmitted infections, cultural awareness, appropriate ways to take medication history, vaccinations for hepatitis B and hepatitis C, appropriate counseling techniques, operational issues including reimbursement and record-keeping requirements, patient referral resources, resources for pharmacists, the pharmacology of PrEP, and financial assistance. Ultimately, as a committee, we determined in that first meeting a second meeting was necessary to receive additional information from the stakeholders that would be beneficial to the committee to refine our work. During our second meeting, the committee considered a draft regulation framework that detailed some recommended provisions. As part of a meeting, there appeared to be a general consensus that the necessary training could be achieved in a shorter duration than had been initially indicated. Specifically, during the second meeting, the committee received comments from various stakeholders indicating the duration of training ranged from 1 hour to 3 to 4. The committee was reminded that SB 159 was to address access and the initiation of treatment and not the continuation of care. CSHP provided comments that included a basic framework of training components and they established an estimated time to complete such topics. Based on their estimates, and the training would be completed in 1.5 hours. The outline included 20 minutes on HIV and antiretroviral therapy, 30 minutes on patient counseling, 15 minutes on CDC guidelines for PrEP, 15 minutes on CDC guidelines for PEP, and 10 minutes on the financial assistance and resources. You hear me, and I just want to remind you, financial assistance and resources is one of the requirements of the legislation, so that has to be part of the training. In consideration of the public comment and the written comments received in advance of the meeting, the committee ultimately determined that the necessary elements of the training program could be achieved in 1.5 hours. More could be, a training program could have more hours, but 1.5 would be the minimum. When considering the required elements of the training program, the committee noted 2 content areas that must be included in a program consistent with the statutory requirements. As I just said, financial assistance for both PrEP and PEP, and the clinical eligibility recommendations provided by the CDC guidelines. Having those elements determined as a committee, we reviewed the suggested elements in the draft regulation framework, including pharmacology, the legal requirements spelled out in SB 159, patient counseling information, and appropriate counseling techniques, operational requirements, patient referral resources, and supplemental resources for the pharmacists. The committee also received public comments suggesting additional elements for the training include interpretation of HIV tests, the importance of patients being tested for sexually transmitted diseases, and information on recommended vaccines for hepatitis B and hepatitis C. Ultimately, after consideration of all the background materials, written and oral stakeholder comments, the committee reached the following conclusions. Number 1, a single training program should be developed to encompass both PrEP and PEP. And I'll just kind of qualify that. We approached this thinking that we were going to have 2 training programs, one for PEP and one for PrEP. But after this meeting, it was clear that really what we needed to do is to have one program in which both PrEP and PEP were presented. The training program should be a minimum of 1.5 hours. Once again, we base that 1.5 hours specifically on what CSHP provided. And from other testimony, we had numerous people come up. Probably at the end of the day, the range was 1.5, 2 to 3. Those are the most common, with probably 1.5 being the one that we heard the most and embraced. And once again, that's a minimum. So a training program can be more than 1.5 hours. It just needed to be a minimum of that. And since then, I'll have, as a side note, we have looked at other training programs around HIV, PrEP, and PEP, and it seems to be fairly consistent. 1.5 to 2 hours is what we see most commonly. The board should accept a training program that satisfies the requirement elements of a training provider that is board certified or approved by ACPE. So the thought behind this is we wanted to be able to have a variety of ways that training programs could be created. We didn't want to have the board to have to approve everything. We love, ACPE. They do a great job in our pharmacy schools and in a lot of our continuing education. But then also, after hearing from the stakeholders, we decided that it was reasonable to have the flexibility of also having a board-approved program. Number 4, the training program must include all the elements detailed in the attached proposed, including pre-exposure and post-exposure prophylaxis pharmacology, legal requirements contained in BPC codes 4052.02 and 4052.03, patient counseling information and techniques, including counseling specifically on sexually transmitted diseases and sexual health, patient referral and supplemental resources, clinical eligibility requirements. So once again, we felt like those were the minimum that is needed for the training. A training program can have more. Once again, referring to the training programs that we have looked at, that was consistent, and this was a national HIV curriculum self-study program that was consistent with what we saw in these other programs. Patients must maintain documentation of completion, pharmacists. Pharmacists must maintain documentation of completion of the training program for at least 4 years. And then the last thing, an approved training course must include an assessment of the individual's knowledge, and a score of 70% or higher was appropriate. The committee recommendation recommended regulated language is included in attachment 1. So the committee recommendation motion is update the regulation text as discussed in the 6 policy areas, recommend that the board adoption of the proposed emergency regulation and delegate to the executive officer the authority to make changes consistent with the policy. But before we talk, I need to move on, just say a couple other things. As mentioned when I first started this, following the meeting, an additional policy consideration was identified related to the ongoing continuing education. Specifically, should the board also require ongoing continuing education for pharmacists like the requirement for pharmacists that furnish nicotine replacement products? As the chair of the committee, I believe ongoing continuing education is appropriate. But I would like to open it up for discussion of the board, and perhaps the committee members might want to speak up first if they so choose. Should the board agree, then the suggested language I will recommend being added to the regulation. The reason I'm recommending this is I think there's a lot of changes in this area, and I think it's reasonable that there could be new drugs, new pharmacology, new CDC guidelines. Things are changing, and so I think it's appropriate that a pharmacist doesn't just take the training once and that covers it for 20, 30, 40 years. So that's why I'm making the recommendation, kind of holding off on the committee motion for discussion. If it's not, that doesn't sound reasonable, that's fine. We can go with the committee motion and not have CE.
I agree with that. I did take the 1.5 hours with CPHA.
It's kind of, yeah.
Okay.
Your mic's on, but I think you just put the mic.
Okay. I did take the CE in 2019 with CPHA, and I think that I think it's a good idea that it's repeated just as you suggest, every 2 years.
I have a comment. You mentioned a number of times that although you're recommending a minimum of 1.5, that they could have more. My experience has been with continuing education courses that if you mandate a minimum, that's what you're going to get. You're not going to get any more. And I'm wondering are you really sure that the 1.5 is enough?
Before we go there, can we just kind of decide the CE thing? So decide if
Okay.
we're going to go with the
Well,
committee
I would
recommendation?
agree with continuing.
What's that?
I would agree that you want to have continuing updates.
Okay. Alan, did you were in all the meetings, Jerry, or do you have an opinion on continuing?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of it. It seems like additional regulation that's, to me, it seems like additional regulation that's unnecessary. I think people that are going to be doing this will see the need for it. I think that people that are going to be doing this are going to be more or less dedicated to it because it's so labor intensive. It's not something they're going to do just once in a while. And so I think it's unnecessary regulation for minimal return. And when you say there's things that are changing, yes, things are changing at absolutely every facet of the whole drug armamentarium out there. And so I hesitate to start from a regulatory point of view assigning continuing education. So I'm against it.
Okay. Albert, do you have an opinion?
Well, I agree with Debbie. I think with all this changing, fast changing, I think we should have some kind of continuing education. I think 1.5 hour, I think is probably sufficient. 1.5 to 2 hours, but I think we should have it.
So, and I'll read what was proposed. What I'm proposing: a pharmacist performing services authorized in BPP section 4052.02 and 405203 must complete 1 hour of continuing education focused on pre and post exposure prophylaxis therapy biannually for each subsequent renewal cycle following the completion of the training program established. So if you wanted to continue to do it, it's 1 hour every 2 years.
Ms. Veal, a question?
Yes.
What other programs that are approved by the board, such as nicotine replacement or contraception and those kinds, do they currently require CE?
We're not consistent.
We're not consistent, thank you.
So I think nicotine does, I don't think, like naloxone, I don't think does, I don't even think birth control does. So we're not consistent. So I guess just for my own comfort, I would like to, if you don't mind, Mr. President, I'd like to just kind of get a vote.
Sure.
And then we can decide if we want to move on with the committee recommendation or if we want to have a revised motion.
Can I ask a clarifying
Please.
question? Because this is a little out of my comfort zone, and so I don't want to ask a question just to ask the question, but it would seem like you would want to have CE in those areas that are most important at the time for the pharmacists. To have a requirement that says you have to have a CE just to have a CE, and it doesn't relate to everything that relates to patient health and safety, but if it's not necessarily relevant for the issues of naloxone that's going on today, I'm not quite sure we're getting out of it what we're asking the pharmacists to do. And so I'm having a hard time formulating an opinion on these recommendations because it doesn't make sense to me as it is.
So I can talk out of both sides of my mouth on this one.
Okay. Yeah. So no, educate me. I didn't like
yeah.
I said. This is above my pay grade.
The CE that we're saying here is only if you're performing the service. So if you're not performing the service, you're not required to do this on a biannual. I actually tend to agree with Dr. Shad that I tend to be I usually don't like over-regulation, and I would normally think that a pharmacist who's doing this, I mean, this is not really necessarily easy. Probably the post-exposure is easier than the pre-exposure. So I do agree that probably a pharmacist who's actually doing it, maybe they really don't need this CE over their head.
One more comment. Before we move forward, I just wanted to assure that in the process that we do have some comment on this from public comment. So I see that we have experts in the audience in this area.
So-
Don't all run up at the same time.
Okay. Public comment.
Yeah, I mean, I was just, yeah, like, yeah, I'm. This is on the CE portion
CE
only.
portion.
Rob Gaddis with Albertsons Companies. So I just wanted to make a comment regarding the CE. Based out of Idaho, Idaho's done a lot of progressive things with pharmacist prescribing. And when you look at it from what the future may entail, if you continue to add CE requirements for everything that the pharmacist may or may not be doing in the future, it's going to continue to get more and more intensive with what the pharmacist has to comply to keep their license up to date. I would agree with the comments that were made that if a pharmacist is engaged in these activities and they feel that they need to have additional training or CE to supplement their knowledge, then they have that ability to do that whether there's a requirement or not. So I would just advise that based on the future that we're going into right now, next year you may be talking about prescribing for UTIs. Another year you're going to be talking about rapid flu and strep tests. The other thing that you need to consider is what's the availability of CE today and what may it be in the future. Some of these topics get very narrow focused and you may not have CE that's available for people to comply with. And it's not something I've looked into, but just something that we've considered as we've looked at these requirements across the country.
Hi, my name is Lisa Gunther Lum. I'm a pharmacist and president of the California Society of Health System Pharmacists. And I speak in support of keeping the minimum education requirement to 90 minutes, as well as what this prior speaker said is that if this is your area of interest.
I promise we'll give you time again, but let's talk about the CE.
Yeah, the CE.
And then we'll have you, then you can come back up and talk about the other stuff.
Okay. So I'm in support of keeping the CE to just the initial CE, and there's no need to continue to have repeat sessions. If this is your area of concern, you're going to be well-versed in it, I think.
Thank you. And you can come back up in just a minute for the rest of it.
Steve Gray as an individual. First of all, reflect the earlier speaker. Across the country, we're not seeing this requirement for subject matter CE, especially in therapeutics, on a recurring basis. And in fact, it's going just the opposite. States are considering, and people in California are considering, that there is a general requirement by law, by both regulatory and civil law, that pharmacists stay up to date and are going to be facing problems if they don't stay up to date. And so that should be considered. And then Board Member Serpa made a comment earlier today. For this CE requirement that doesn't apply to all pharmacists, but only the ones that are doing PEP and PrEP, how are you going to know? There's no requirement for them to register with the board. So the only time the board's going to find out is probably when there's an allegation that something went wrong, and then if it's reported. And so, you know, it's going to be problematic to have effective enforcement. And I'm not recommending that you ask them to register their service, just like they don't register their nicotine or other replacement services they provide. So from a practical matter and from a professional ethical responsibility matter, I don't think it's really necessary. Thank you.
So Steve, You mentioned that, I mean, nicotine requires continuing ed, right? How do they keep track of that?
It's not clear to me that they do or how they do. But
I think what happens is that if a board inspector were to go into a pharmacy and you say that you provide these services, they would probably ask you for, can I see your original education certificate, and then can I see your follow-up? And then as you state, if there's ever a consumer complaint, we're going to probably zero in on it too. But I agree with you that it's not in your application right now or your renewal that I do PEP and here's my CE.
And just to emphasize that point, if you walk into a large pharmacy that hopefully is providing the nicotine or hopefully is providing one of these services, especially in an area, and they have many pharmacists, many part-time, many covering pharmacists. Imagine that inspector going in there. They're asking for personal CE records, which pharmacies are not required to keep now anyway. Unless they do it for liability coverage reasons and so forth. So you're really putting an extra burden on also your inspectors if that's the way you expect them to enforce this. Thank you.
Okay, any more public comment? So you want to vote on?
Yeah, I mean, it probably as the chair, I'm probly leaning to that's not going to be, that I'm probably going to vote against myself.
Yeah.
Maybe that was a bad idea.
Yeah. Can I just ask one final question?
So do you have a motion?
No, I just want to ask one final question before we have this motion.
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to still understand the issue, so I appreciate your indulgence. I'm not quite sure what problem we're trying to solve.
I think what we're trying to solve is, it's a pretty complicated, I don't know if you had a chance to look through all the CDC stuff. It's complicated, but, I feel like I'm, downplaying pharmacists if I say it's complicated and we need to check them up. You check up on them every 2 years.
But
I
what are we
think
trying to
just
solve?
public safety is what we were trying to make sure we ensured, and I'm not sure it's necessary.
Okay.
So you don't have a motion?
So I don't have a motion.
Does anybody have a motion?
I always against overregulation, so I could go either way.
Okay, I think.
Can I make a motion to table this until further research is done?
No, I don't think we're going to do it.
We don't, okay.
I don't think we need it.
All right.
It was just kind of one of those things I wanted to.
I'll make a motion not to adopt the language.
So if we ignore this and the committee recommendation stands, the committee motion stands.
And could you read that again, please?
Yeah. The committee recommendation is update the regulation text as discussed. So those 6 policy areas I discussed. Recommend that the board adopt the proposed emergency regulations and delegate to the executive officer the authority to make changes consistent with the policy. So that would be the committee motion, so there does not need to be a second. But I do think there's going to be some comment because in here is a number of hours of CE that's required for the training.
And that includes the 1.5 hours.
So, yeah, I think there's going to be comment, and probably the first commenter here is going to talk about the number of hours.
Right.
The minimum number of hours for CE.
Okay.
So now you can come back up on the hours. So thank you for letting me focus in on that one topic.
First, I want to say, on behalf of CPHA, congratulations to Ann Sodegren for her official title. I neglected to say that in my earlier comments, so congratulations on behalf of CPHA. Board members, again, Danny Martinez with CPHA. You all have received our letter, and yes, this comment is on the minimum. I do want to say, if within our letter, we do appreciate Chair Veal's work on this. This is a very highly complicated topic. And while we understand that the purpose of this is to increase access, we actually agree. And I will say, for those of you who don't know, CPHA was one of the original co-sponsors of this measure, along with several groups, including Equality California, San Francisco AIDS Foundation, LA LGBT, and I know I'm missing one. I apologize for those watching. And so when this issue came, I want to first start off, this issue came to us because the whole reason this issue came to us was because patients were not getting access to PrEP and PEP through their physicians, either because they didn't want to, they had a moral dilemma, they didn't know about it, what have you. And we all recognize that pharmacy is the most accessible form of healthcare that exists for patients, right? And so, being that this is a community pharmacy bill, we want to get this right. And this is not about, convenience for the pharmacists to get their education. This is about patient safety. And I hesitate every time there's a comparison on this issue to either naloxone or smoking cessation or any of that, because they're just entirely different drugs for different reasons. There are side effects associated with PrEP and PEP. And in addition to side effects, there also, there needs to be an entire patient history done, or appropriate patient history done, before a patient starts PrEP. And as I've mentioned in my letter, we're talking about the required knowledge of each medication, both PrEP and PEP, a patient's sexual history, intravenous drug usage, knowledge of HIV disease state, STIs, HIV testing. HIV testing, by the way, there's 7 different things you need to go through to get that. Side effects of each medication, appropriate follow-up, referral to necessary resources, because after all, we're only, as pharmacists, they're only allowed to provide an initial 30 or 60-day course of PrEP and a 28-day course of PEP. After that, they're obligated to refer patients to either their primary care physician or another physician who operates in this space. All the things I just mentioned, there is no way we can possibly say that this can be done in 90 minutes as a minimum. And again, yes, as a minimum. There is no way that can happen. I'd like to also remind you that the FDA only approved PrEP in 2012. This thing is less than 10 years old. And while the general knowledge about PrEP and PEP, it's been, the CDC guidelines have been updated at least twice, as recently as 2017, there's still not general knowledge about it. And the last thing we want to see, as important as this issue is, we don't want to see a patient inappropriately furnish PrEP or PEP and produce a negative side effect that then results in HIV. Because that would set this entire effort back years. Yes. Yes. So,
Sorry. You want me to do that again? The board members are very conscientious, and I know that they've read the minutes from our
Yes.
meeting. So they...
So and to just basically to, like you mentioned, you've seen the rest of the letters that have come to you from other organizations as well, supporting our minimum of 3 hours. This is what we are requesting this board in the name of patient safety. We ask this because we know that all the work that's gone into this, getting up to this point, this is where we feel comfortable. And I'll even mention Senator Wiener himself is comfortable, has expressed comfort to the board with a 3-hour requirement. I am obligated to mention he wants a maximum of 3 hours. And as you eloquently stated, when you see a program that has a minimum, that's usually what it is. So I'd ask this board to really, really think about this and consider our request for the 3-hour minimum, because we don't want to screw this up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please come forward. I do believe that we heard from the senator's office, and that, Ann, am I right? I thought he said between 2 and 3. Yeah. So I understand that you heard 3, but I also want to make sure the board members understand it's 2 or 3.
Hi, well, my name is Jerica Lam. I'm actually an associate professor from Chapman School of Pharmacy. I'm an HIV specialist pharmacist as well, so I can speak to this matter just personally, as well as with patients I take care of. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here to represent my colleagues, the pharmacist specialists, as well as HIV specialists, the physicians, the PAs, and NPs. In terms of what I've just heard, I just want to address a few points. I apologize that I don't have a pen to write down, so I'm going to go from memory. But in terms of HIV testing, it is not 7 steps. It's actually very simple now. And the thing is that it's just a saliva test or a prick of a finger test, and then we do a 4th generation test via Western blot to verify that person is positive or not. So it is not as cumbersome as maybe in the 90s, in the early 2000s. So technology has advanced. The other thing that I want to emphasize to the board and everyone who's watching this is that I like the point of access to care. I'm actually a big component of patient safety myself. I'm on the Patient Safety Foundation Movement workshop and work group that actually write articles for medication errors as well as culture of safety, putting patient first. So as a practicing pharmacist at Ultimate Clinic, which is a federally qualified health center in Santa Ana, I'm there 2 days a week. I see patients. The one thing that I want to counter the previous speaker's comment is that we have to work together as a pharmacy team. Access doesn't occur just at the community setting. Access also occurs in the emergency department as well as in the clinical settings, ambulatory care clinics. I'm actually at an ambulatory care clinic where I actually see patients, provide care, provide PrEP education, provide PEP education as well. So the one thing that I'm a little bit concerned about in terms of extending the education from 1.5 hours to 2 to 3 hours is that we are going to increase barrier to access. So as mentioned by Steve Gray earlier, we have specialty pharmacies who actually specialize in biologics as well as HIV medications. It is incumbent for us, and all of us are in this field because we want to take care of patients. We put patients first. It is incumbent of myself to always be up to date with the changes of the guidelines and treatments for HIV and hepatitis, patients with hepatitis infection. So in terms of, again, I am emphasizing the need to reduce the hours from 2 or 3 hours as suggested by the previous speaker to 1.5 because we want to make sure that we increase access and education. We understand that pharmacists are so busy in every setting. For them to be sitting in front of their computer system watching a webinar for 2 to 3 hours, I don't know if that is feasible. And again, this goes back to your point, minimum competency in terms of access and also being able to provide that educational point. For myself, I'm actually certified by the American Academy of HIV Medicine. I actually obtain more than 30 hours of HIV education every year. So for those who are specialized in this field, we are responsible to provide patient safety and patient care. Thank you.
And I do have a question for you, and thank you for coming up. And I look at these things a little different, almost backwards from the standpoint. I mean, an hour, 2 hours, that's an arbitrary number. I don't know what that gets you, what that means. For me, it's the quality of the education and what you're supposed to learn that helps patient safety. Now, if you came up here and said, here are the 4 or 5 things that every pharmacist should know and teach to that, and if that took 10 hours or 30 hours or 40 hours, I would say yes. If it took a half hour or 1 hour, I would say yes. Because, the goal should be is that pharmacists learning the information he or she should know. And then my question, I guess, to you would be, is there a list of what are the top 3 or 4 things out there? And then I would work backwards and figure out how long does it take to teach those top 3 or 4 things, then create a timeline around that.
Yes, excellent question, and it goes back to the point where I work with Jim, Lisa, as well as Don Kishi from UCSF in terms of a working outline to extend the various important topics over 90 minutes. The one thing that I will also want to emphasize is that as a professor or associate professor at the School of Pharmacy, I've taught at Loma Linda, now at Chapman. The one thing is that all students now throughout the nation are receiving education in HIV medicine. It is not new to them. It is also what I hear is also on the board. So when we are providing this 90-minute webinar, it's in a way minimum competency, but it's not new drugs that they've not heard about. So this is part of their curriculum. This is part of ACPE requirement as part of the therapeutics curriculum that they need to know their infectious disease meds, their oncology meds, those things. So what I want to emphasize is that what we are teaching to our new graduates and those who are practicing already in the community, is that it is not new information. It is more of, like you said, the highlight and what they need to do in sexual health, taking as well as making sure there are risk factors that patients are aware of. And in regards to side effects to these antiretrovirals, they're not as bad as when we had the AZT days in the 80s and 90s. Patients are living longer, they're healthier. These medications are safer for patients too. So in terms of considering longer time, it is not necessary, because the main goal is, again, access points to care and to ensure patient safety.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, as we wait to see if there's anybody else who wants to make a comment, for the public members of the board, in case you didn't catch it, what this legislation is about, PrEP and PEP, it's a very short time period. It's not like the birth control that we did with, you know, with prior, where we were giving birth control possibly forever. This is, I've been exposed, we give them medication quickly so HIV doesn't spread. And there's a very finite time period that we can do that. We can, you know, it's within a couple days, and it's only within X number of days that we can provide the medication. Even the pre-exposure, I live a risky lifestyle and I want to be covered. We aren't providing medication forever for them. It's just to kind of get them covered right now, and then they need to go and get coverage. They need to go into a physician, and you know, it's more extensive. So we're just kind of triaging really both of these situations.
I guess this is a long way for me to say it. I'd rather mandate what should be taught versus a number of hours. Because I can sit I've had professors that have been horrible and talked about history and things of that nature, and I'm no smarter coming out of that timeline, but I checked that box. And so all I'm saying, if we're going to mandate a time, let's work backwards and say, here are the criteria that has to be taught. And if that takes an hour and a half, 2 hours, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, so be it. Then we're achieving our goal of public health and safety.
So to that, I can give you two things. Number one is CSHP wrote a very good letter that's in the attachment. And they outlined exactly how they would lay it out and how many minutes each thing would take. And that's how they came up with their hour and 1.5 hours. The other thing is, we've looked at, Ann and I have done, well, really, Ann has done a lot of research and she's handed it off to me. But there's quite a few other CEs. One, and these are from the National HIV. And they have a lesson plan, and shows exactly all the they're going through all the things we're talking about. They do pre-exposure prophylaxis as a 1 hour CE, post-exposure prophylaxis is another hour CE. So, it seems like we're in the right ballpark. Is there any other public comment?
Okay, so
the committee motion is the 6 items that make it up, and that is a single training program, minimum of 1.5 hours of CE. The board, the training program can either be approved by the board or ACPE. Number 4 is the pieces of things that need to be in the training. Number 5 was that the pharmacist needs to maintain documentation that they took the training for at least 4 years. And then number 6 was that the course had to have a score of 70% or higher.
okay, Ann has one comment.
I just wanted to let members know that as part of the statute, we are required to develop this in consultation with the medical board. And I just wanted to let you know that we have been keeping them apprised of the developments as they've been going, and we've received preliminary comments that they are in support of the regulation, waiting for additional, but just wanted to let you know that we are fulfilling our obligation there as well.
Okay, before we vote, we don't need a second because it's a committee motion. Is there any more public comment? No? Okay. One.
See, aren't you glad you came today? You're like participating.
Yeah, so Rich Kowalski, I'm just a community pharmacist. I've worked in this area for about 5 years now, and just to comment on single training programs versus repeated training every 2 years. For the most part, PrEP and PEP have been relatively stable as therapies in the last 5 years. PrEP's been about 5-6 years. PEP has been around since the 90s. However, what I'm seeing with the drug companies is they are becoming a little more novel in their technologies. They're developing injectable PrEP therapies. So when you consider continuing education requirements, try to think about, in 2 years, where do you see these therapies? Is the training you're providing someone this year going to be the same that you're going to provide someone in 2 years? That's just food for thought.
Thank you.
Oh. And then, I don't know if it's just open, you can just revisit training in 2 years.
Thank you. All right, so we have the committee motion. All those in favor of the committee motion, raise your hand. Opposed? I think it's unanimous. Any abstentions? Oh, I thought I saw your hand up, that's fine. Okay.
So, Mr. President, just to clarify, the motion was to adopt the language as proposed as emergency regulations, is that correct? And to delegate the authority to the executive officer
it's actually in the...
Is that the correct?
It's in my packet, but I can read it to you. Update the regulation text as discussed in the 6 policy areas. Recommend the board adoption of the proposed emergency regulation and delegate to the executive officer the authority to make changes consistent with the policy.
And to take steps to get the emergency regulations
So that's
approved by OAL?
my next part is emergency.
Okay,
We haven't
great.
gotten there yet. As noted in the chair report under the provisions of the Administrative Procedures Act, an agency may adopt emergency regulations. However, the regulation remains in effect for 180 days unless the Office of Administrative Law approves readoption in 90 days. Further, although the statute directs the board to adopt emergency regulation, it is recommended that the board make a declaration of emergency. Such a declaration would be consistent with the statutory requirement of SB 159 as well as the Administrative Procedures Act. As noted earlier, creating access points in pharmacies is critical to save lives and reduce the spread of HIV, given the narrow window to start PrEP following the exposure. So the suggested, this is not a committee motion. I'm going to make this, because this came up after the committee. So I'm going to make this motion. I'm hoping one of the committee members will second it, and I think Albert over here is going to. The finding of emergency based on the statutory provisions contained in Senate Bill 159, Wiener Statute 2019, that mandates the board to adopt emergency regulations by January 1st, 2020 for the immediate preservation of the public July 1st, 2020, for the immediate preservation of the public peace, health, safety, or general welfare. And I have one more additional follow-up motion. You second that?
Okay.
Second that.
Okay, that was the first one, then you'll have another one after that.
Yeah, I have another one. And
Okay.
it's also about...
Do we have any public comment on that motion? Okay. All those in support of the motion, raise your hand. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Motion passes. Go ahead with your next one.
In addition to the emergency declaration, it was suggested that the board also clarify its intent to also pursue the change through the regular rulemaking process. It is recommended that the board, if deemed appropriate, separately vote on a concurrent initiation of the regular rulemaking process. The chair report provides another suggested motion that could be used. As with the prior action, this is not a committee recommendation. A motion is required. The suggested motion is approve the proposed addition to Title 16 CCR Section 1747, independent HIV pre- and post-exposure prophylaxis furnishing, initiate the regular rulemaking process, delegate to the executive officer the authority to make any non-substantive changes and clarifying changes consistent with the board's policy direction upon recommendation of the control agencies.
Okay, are there any public comments to
I
that
second
motion?
it.
Any public comments? No? Okay, all those in favor of that motion, raise your hand. Okay, passes. There are no, everybody raised their hands. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm moving on to the next is discussion and consideration of board's proposal regarding the advanced pharmacy technician requirements and functioning. Are we good to go, or do we need to take a break? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said, are we good to go, or do you need to take a break before we get into the next one?
Do you want to take a break?
I'm fine. I'm just looking down the aisle, the table.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay. So as background, in response to changes in pharmacy practice, the expanded roles of pharmacists, the committee and the board completed development of a statutory proposal to create new licensing programs for the advanced pharmacy technician. Ultimately, the committee and the board focused on proposed changes that would benefit consumers, including making pharmacists more available to engage in the direct patient care activities. The development of this proposal spans several public meetings, offering stakeholders the opportunity to participate in the development of the proposal. I kind of want to point out that this actually goes back years. I was chair of this committee, I think 3 or 4 years ago when this started. At that point, we had stakeholder meetings, not stakeholder, I should say committee meetings, which in effect are stakeholder meetings. When the prior committee chair, Mr. Weiser, we also had multiple committee meetings on advanced pharmacy technician and actually developed some regulations that we put forth, but the board decided recently to pull it back to kind of refine it. And that original proposal had 2 different advanced pharmacy technician categories. So we now have had another committee meeting. So we've had multiple opportunities over the past months and years to discuss this proposal. In response to comments and feedback received subsequent to the board's initial proposal, the committee determined it appropriate to reassess some of the basic tenets of the proposal. The committee again provided an opportunity for stakeholders to provide comments to the proposals in a public meeting during our December meeting. When that meeting was set up, it was very clear we had 2 topics to discuss, and we devoted that meeting to the 2 topics. One was SB 159, and the second one was this. So it was kind of a dual meeting. We had quite a bit of input. The chair report details the basic summary of the provisions and recommendations from the committee and the draft proposals included in attachment 2. Unfortunately, one element is incorrectly summarized in the meeting material. Specifically, the chair report incorrectly indicates that the recommended experience is 3,000 hours, and the committee actually voted on and approved 2,050 hours of experience. With that correction, the main changes to the board's initial proposal included several elements. First, a single advanced pharmacy technician license as opposed to separate licenses based on work settings. This change is appropriate, especially in light of the similarities in the licensure requirements originally proposed. Second, a recommendation to change the pathways to licensure. The committee expressed concern with the minimum licensing requirements as initially developed exceeded what was necessary for a minimum competency to perform the authorized duties, thus creating a barrier to licensure for the advanced license. As recommended, the application requirements would require an individual to possess a current and active license as a pharmacy technician and have at least 2,050 hours of experience performing the duties as a technician or intern. In addition, the individual will need to satisfy one of 3 possible additional criteria. 1, possess a current certification by a pharmacy technician certification program. 2, demonstrate a completion of an AA degree in pharmacy technology, or 3, complete a bachelor's degree. I note that the requirements to pass an exam has been removed. The past premise for this removal of the examination was that we already had the 3 pathways discussed, and testing was part of the requirement of all 3 of those other paths. The third element of our recommendation is to consolidate the authorized function of the advanced pharmacy tech as opposed to the initial proposal, which specified authorized functions in community pharmacies and separate functions in inpatient pharmacies. This is appropriate as the practice site model has evolved, and probably one of the feedback that we had received from the prior proposal was that it shouldn't be 2, it should be 1. That there was a lot of blending of jobs between the 2 proposals, and people changed functions. Just like a pharmacist, there's 1 pharmacy license. There's not a hospital pharmacy license and a retail pharmacy license and a long-term pharmacy license. There's 1. During the meeting, the committee received quite a bit of public comment on the proposal. While some provided comments specific to the proposal, one commenter suggested another meeting was necessary. It is important to note that the purpose of the agenda item was to provide an opportunity for the committee members to consider the proposal and for stakeholders to provide input during the meeting. Further concerns were expressed the committee heard that comment and felt very strongly that a subsequent meeting was not necessary. Further, of the concerns expressed by stakeholders, many seemed to stem from what appeared to be duplication of authority to perform tasks between pharmacy technician and the proposed advanced pharmacy technician. The committee noted that the supervision requirement between the 2 is different, most notably the level of autonomy. More precisely, a pharmacy technician by law must work under the direct supervision and control of a pharmacist when performing non-discretionary tasks. An advanced pharmacy technician, however, does not require direct supervision and control. This is a significant difference. There appeared to be general consensus that this was not significantly clear in the original proposal. As such, subsequent to the meeting, in addition to incorporating the requested changes by the committee, the language was omitted to more directly highlight the supervision. In general, with the exception of one commentator, there was support for the revised proposal. Although some expressed concern that in its current form, the proposal was silent to ratio. After discussion and consideration, the committee determined the issue of ratio should be discussed with the full board, and as noted in the chair report, I'm recommending a possible solution. During the meeting, one commentator suggested that the conditions for use should be refined, however, no suggestions were offered. The committee requested submission of suggestions on additional services or condition. It is my understanding, and looking at the letters we have received, no such suggestions were received. The committee requested that any outstanding questions from the public be submitted to allow for research prior to response. It is my understanding, in reviewing the letters we received, no such specifics were submitted for the committee's review. More detailed information on the committee and public discussion is included in the draft meeting minutes, which I'm sure that all the board members have read. The licensing committee has spent, a lot of hours and thought, and we appreciate all the efforts and the comments made by in our prior meetings. We have received some written comments, and those items were sent either, I think, are they out? They were either part of the packet if you looked online, or I think we put some of the items out. I call to your attention the proposal included in the meeting materials. As indicated, subsequent to the meeting, additional changes were made to reflect the committee's direction. Further, council refined the proposed restructure of some of the proposal, providing clarifying language regarding this supervision requirements. So the committee recommendation is to move the proposal to the board, with discussed changes, removing provisions related to verifying the accuracy on the new prescription labels, incorporating a training requirement for APTs, administration of immunizations, correct the fee provision to remove references to the hospital, and provide the authority for the chair of the committee to work with the staff and council to refine the language and seek guidance from the board on how to address the ratio issue. So first what we, I think, want to do, and Ann, correct me, first I think we want to go with the motion with the language as we have in attachment. Sorry, I'm trying to come. I think it's attachment 2. Is that correct, Ann?
Sorry, my computer's not responding.
See, attachment 2. Yeah, it is attachment 2. So I'm hoping that everyone has had a chance to look at attachment 2. So the definition, I'll just kind of flip through it quickly. The definition of advanced pharmacy technician means an individual licensed by the board who is authorized to perform all the duties permitted by Section 4115, and the technical pharmacy task is authorized in Section 4115.6 under the indirect supervision of a pharmacist. For the purposes of this section, indirect supervision means that a pharmacist is on the premise at all times and is generally aware of all the activities provided by the advanced pharmacy technician, but the advanced pharmacy technician may, if permitted by the pharmacist, perform authorized tasks without direction from the pharmacist. The specific duties, a licensed advanced pharmacy technician may perform these technical tasks to allow for the pharmacist to engage in more direct patient services. 1, verify the accuracy of the filling of a prescription container by confirming the medication and quantity reflected on the label is accurate, reflects the container's content for the refill drug orders. 2, accept new prescriptions from a prescriber's office unless the prescription requires the professional judgment of a pharmacist. 3, inquire about the intended purpose or indication for prescribed medication on verbal orders received from the prescriber's office. 4, accept refill authorization from the prescriber's office unless the authorization requires professional judgment of a pharmacist. 5, transfer a prescription to another pharmacy. 6, receive the transfer of a prescription from another pharmacy. 7, provide the technical task of administration of immunization if appropriate training has been completed. 8, initiate post-discharge contact with the patient or patient's agent for the patient recently discharged from a health facility. 9, provide medication guidance and referral services for pharmacy services post-discharge from a health facility. 10, develop medication dosing schedule for discharged patients. 11, initiate post-discharge contact with the patient or patient's agents. And B, other than as permitted by this section, an advanced pharmacy technician may not engage in direct patient services. So once again, it's not saying that only an advanced pharmacy technician can do these things. It's saying that an advanced pharmacy technician are allowed to do them without the direction of a pharmacist. So it's giving them, once again, more autonomy. Conditions for use of this: a pharmacy may use the services of an advanced pharmacy technician if all the following conditions are met. The duties authorized in Section 4115.6 are performed as specified in the pharmacy's policies and procedures. The pharmacist in charge is responsible for the ongoing evaluation of the performance of the personnel as authorized in Subdivision A of Section 4115.6. The pharmacist personally provides all new prescription medication and controlled substance medications directly to the patient or the patient's agent and provides patient information consistent with the provisions of 4052A8. A record is created identifying the personnel responsible for the preparation and dispensing of the prescription of medications, and E, initiate and provide post-discharge follow-up for a patient recently discharged from a health facility consistent with provisions of Section 4052A8. Such discharge follow-up must be provided by a pharmacist at the request of the patient or patient's agent unless the patient is discharged to another health facility. I think I already went through the licensing requirements. There is, as a condition of renewal, an advanced pharmacy technician shall complete 20 hours of continuing education each renewal cycle, including a minimum of 2 hours of education in medication error prevention or 2 hours of board-sponsored law and ethics. I want to just note that we determined that previously we had in here that they had to maintain, if they were had a pharmacy technician certificate, that they had to maintain that. We purposefully took that out. They still have to get 20 hours of continuing education. However, maintaining the pharmacy technician certification is an additional expense. And as long as they're taking the continuing education, we did not feel that that was necessary. The fee for advanced pharmacy technician application and examination shall be $260 and may be increased to $285. The fee for initial licensure and biannual review shall be $140 and may be increased to $195. So that is what, from the stakeholders and from the meeting that we had, that's where we landed. I ask, if you come forward, that you please bring new information or comments specific to what we have proposed here. I would prefer not to relive what we already discussed in the committee meeting.
Good afternoon. My name is Fred Aziz. I am an outpatient pharmacist under UNAC and AFSCME, and I've also been a previous pharmacy technician instructor. Thanks to the board for opening the conversation on this issue, but I'm hoping that the board will spend a little bit more time discussing these changes as they may impact patient care and the scope of practice. As we review the details of the proposals, we have questions. We want to support the Board of Pharmacy, but hope to spend more time on this proposal so we're all in agreement and are on the same page. This concept has come up before, as has said, in the legislature and did not move. I believe the author chose not to pursue. I think we would need more time on this concept. We respectfully request more time on this topic.
So let me just address what you just said. This was not what was before the legislature. We have done, based on our meeting, we have done a massive review based on comments we had heard from stakeholders prior to the meeting, and then from the many meeting comments at the meeting. So this is not what was before the legislature. We tried to take the comments that we heard were causing issues at the legislature, and we believe that this is what has corrected it based on the feedback we got from the stakeholders.
Okay.
If I may, Eric Robles, United Nurses Associations of California, Union of Healthcare Professionals. The concept was, in fact, a conversation in the legislature a couple of years ago. I believe the author decided not to pursue the concept mainly because of the scope of practice issues. These scope of practice issues still remain in this proposal, and all we're asking is for some time. Let's talk a little bit more about this. I think this is there's a little bit more work we can do and more input. I get it. This conversation has been happening for some time. Clearly, it wasn't cooked in the past because it hasn't moved forward. So, we're asking for a little bit more time. This is a heavy conversation.
It was, we agree with you that what was before the legislature last did have flaws. And we believe that we have corrected those. Once again, from the stakeholder meeting that we had, we believe that we have corrected all those flaws. For the most part, I think the stakeholders walked out of that meeting saying, you got it.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Chair. Sherry's a pharmacist with UNAC too. I guess what I'm trying to communicate is, we really want to participate and partner up. I think you know who UNAC is. We're asking for a little bit more time. The board has the opportunity to decide what they want to do, clearly, but we really want to engage in this conversation a little bit more because this isn't something that can be done from one day to the next.
Can I just ask, I don't believe you were at the last meeting, at the last stakeholder meeting.
I'm sorry. My kids had the flu during right before the Christmas holidays. This is when the board meeting happened. I would have loved to have joined you, though. My apologies.
It sounds like the licensing committee has been working with the stakeholders in good faith.
Just get closer.
It sounds like the committee has been working with all the stakeholders in good faith for quite a while now. My biggest concern is putting this off for much longer. So if we were to put this off for a little bit longer, how long do you think it'll take to get to some kind of consensus here to address scope of practice and other issues?
I'd love to have a deeper conversation on this, right? Like, ultimately, Ms. Deborah won't agree with us, or we may not agree. There are some concepts in the proposals that our pharmacists may not agree.
No, wait a minute here. You're saying you didn't come to the meetings, and then you want to prolong it. But and then you're saying we want to talk about this some more. We want to do it right. But what do you want to do specifically here?
We're asking for a delay. If you want.
No. What do you want the delay for?
To have more conversations with you and the board. Hey, look.
I think what we're trying to say is specifically, what do you want? Because that's kind of what if you even read the chair report said, we asked people specifically, what do we need to change? And please send us letters.
I believe public comments are also important to the conversation. So, we're submitting our public. Look, I'm not here. We're respectfully requesting a delay on this proposal. The board is free to act. I'm not holding you.
Tell us what's wrong.
You guys want to speak to the proposal?
Sherry Gotanda, pharmacist, UNAC UHCP. In looking at some of the proposals, we do have concerns regarding patient safety with the proposal of having the advanced technicians working independently, gathering the medical information, giving immunizations. Those are some of the examples. Also, in terms of further discussion, there was some lack of clarity in terms of what constitutes, what makes up the post-discharge contact. Because we see work with transition of care. Is that what the context is? We're not sure, because a lot of that information is work that is done by the pharmacist, because you're trying to ensure the safe transfer when moving from one area, for example, moving from a hospital into the home or into a skilled nursing facility. And so what is the level of interaction that's happening with the advanced practice tech in those areas? And Fred, did you? There.
I just want to add, as an outpatient pharmacist, I'm just thinking of the liability that's put on the pharmacist. I spoke to Ms. Butler in the past. We've met at a previous meeting where she was an outpatient pharmacist. Just think of all those medication errors that you caught that your pharmacist misfilled, right? So we catch those. Whereas I've taught the class. I've taught the pharmacy technician classes. I've had a lot of techs along the years, but I don't really, for patient safety, I don't know if they're my last check. I don't want.
If you're working as a pharmacist, you can either have the tech do it or not do it. I'm talking about it's your choice.
Well, is it going to be my final choice? I don't know.
And there's criteria on. Not every setting can have these. I read through the criteria of your setting. What has to be in place. The conditions of use. And I think there's been, over the years, it seems like we've heard repeatedly that there's studies out there. I think there was one most recently in Iowa that showed that actually Tech was actually more accurate than Pharmacist Tech Check.
I would like to submit that if we're going to compare Iowa to California, we really have to understand the diversity of California versus Iowa's needs. Our intent right here, respectfully, was just to ask for a delay, right? We didn't want, we weren't trying to have this extra conversation. I really want to have a bigger conversation and talk to the board individually with our folks. I didn't want to play this conversation out so thoroughly because look, there's a lot of sensitivities out there. We're trying to avoid that. We want to partner up with the Board of Pharmacy. UNAC recently became engaged in pharmacy discussions because just like UFCW, who represents pharmacists, we represent pharmacists too. Prior to 2016, we didn't represent pharmacists. So I think you could understand why, when this proposal was originated, that we weren't necessarily involved. We were very highly involved in the passage of 493 even before we represented pharmacists, because we also represent other advanced practice professionals. But for this purpose, we were really hoping that we didn't have to go into a deeper discussion, and maybe we can have a little more thorough discussion with you all. If you have questions, we can answer. We can keep working on this, because we do have some concerns.
Is there a reason why we cannot give the time?
I think the issue is that this has been fully vetted, and there's been multiple meetings and public comment in prior meetings, both at the committee level, and I think that's one of the frustrations you're hearing from our group. It's not meant to say that your comments and your opinions are not valid or valuable to our group. It's just more of that this has been discussed for some time, and what is the issue? I think that's what we're asking for, is what are the specific issues that would require us to delay or repeat discussions that have already happened. So I understand you're coming late to the table because you said that this is a relatively new group of people that you're representing, but looking at not expediting, because we're not trying to rush this, it's just more of why should we delay and repeat discussions that have already happened? So that's the concern, and I know I've heard your answer, but that's the dilemma.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate it. I think coming down here, we knew what we were walking into. I mean, look, I've been doing this for 20 years, working in the legislative process, previously with legislators, with John Chung, their former state controller. We know the process. And, my apologies. But this is a big proposal, and I think we want to be able to be helpful and say, hey, we're behind it. And so that's why we're asking for time. We didn't want to come in and say, hey, we oppose, right? Like, we're trying to meet you all in the middle a little bit. And I appreciate your comments, and we're aware of.
Excuse me, this is really quick. I'm a little confused. You come here asking for time, but it doesn't seem like you came here prepared. If you were really, in my opinion, very serious, and this is a serious situation, I would have a white paper in front of me and would have all the issues laid out and said, here's why we are asking for more time. Here are those areas we feel that your board has missed. That hasn't happened. Yeah. And we've been doing this for a long time. This is not brand new. And so I'm having a hard time feeling your sincerity when you're not prepared to come to the meeting with some specifics that this board can look at. To say you want to have a broader conversation, that means I want to delay.
Right. If I may, I appreciate that. If we did a white paper, it would take some time, and we'd be asking for a 6-month delay. But let me.
I don't want to tell you how to do your job at all, because that's not my role. I'm just saying from the role, and I can only speak for myself here on the board. We have an obligation to everyone, all the stakeholders that took the chance and the opportunity and the time and spent their time working with us up until this point, and to not move forward because someone who comes here and says, I want to have a broader conversation.
So this goes back to the original point. I didn't want to draw it out because we didn't want to come in and say, hey, we oppose this. That's what I'm trying to avoid. That's that's why I'm asking for more time, because we could come in and say, hey, we oppose, because we did oppose this back.
If you want to oppose it, say you oppose it, that's fine.
We're not trying to oppose this. What we're trying to do is figure out how we can get more time and have a, bigger discussion. We may end up in a different place, but I mean, I don't want to come in and say, hey, we oppose it. So it is up to you all to make that decision or not, but that's where I was coming from.
I have a question.
I was going to say, why don't you try to speak? And
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I do have a little concern about the unsupervised liability. So if they make a mistake, who's liable for it? Is there a pharmacist on duty or PIC? I mean, they are being unsupervised.
And that's my concern also.
Yeah.
Can I answer that? Because actually, we talked about it in the committee. That these people do have liability.
Who has the liability? The pharmacist?
Well, there's going to be a shared liability, but they both have they both have
If they
responsibility.
unsupervised, I mean, if I'm not supervised, that person, that they make the mistake, how can I be liable for that?
If they're responsible to have the policies and procedures in place.
Not really, depending on who you're working for. It depends on who you're working for, whether you have control or not. So, I mean, that's not always the case.
If I can point you to the conditions of use, one of the conditions of use is that the pharmacy has policies and procedures about how they're using this person.
Mm-hmm. So I support Ms. Veal. I think that one of the things that we're getting into the weeds about this is no different than other regulations or responsibility of the PIC or the supervising pharmacist for technicians. It's no different than in other situations. So I think that the point here is whether we delay or not delay.
I don't agree with the fact that it is different. I think it is different because in other situations, the pharmacist is supervising and is totally responsible, and this person isn't someone that you're not watching at all, but you're still responsible for them. I don't see that as the same. I don't agree.
So I propose we delay and have them make some comment on a future meeting.
Thank you.
Other public comment?
Motion. Okay, we have a motion. Is there any more?
We have more public comment.
Public comment, okay.
I'm sorry. I know it's late. I apologize. Thank you, though. Thank you, though, for the for the opportunity. I'm Jessica Langley, Executive Director of Education and Advocacy for the National Health Career Association. We offer training, certification, and preparation materials for pharmacy technicians and have the EXCPT nationally accredited certification exam. We did submit a letter, so thank you for that. I know it was in the online information. I don't think it got printed, but hopefully you all have had a chance to see that. And really, one of our main positions and goals is to advocate for the professions that we serve, one of those being pharmacy technicians. We share in your goals of elevating those individuals and creating really a career-driven kind of movement with these people instead of them thinking of it just as a job, but a career. And moving towards a licensure for advanced pharmacy technicians does that. However, there are a couple of suggestions and points that I would like to talk about in the eligibility or the requirements for those technicians. First one being holding an active license in the 2050 hours. If they hold an active license, our suggestion is that they go through one renewal period. Your 2050 hours is only 1 year of working full-time. And I'm sure pharmacists, to kind of go to what they were just expressing their concerns, after 1 year, a pharmacy technician is probably really just getting the basics and the lay of the land of working in whatever pharmacy setting they're employed in. So if you have an individual go through their first renewal cycle period, which is 2 years, they not only show their individual kind of dedication to the profession and the job by staying in the role, but they go through completing the CEs as well, so they are also dedicated to completing the education and professional development requirements that the state also has in place. So that's kind of one thing to get them over that first hurdle and to give them a little more time and experience, because again, after 1 year, trying to elevate someone into those kind of advanced roles may be a little difficult, and that may be something that can help ease the fear of pharmacists in that particular case. The other thing that we feel like from a training perspective that is missing, that is probably the most important, I give kudos to the board, because you are one of less than a handful of states that have actually brought legislation on this topic up and have draft language. New Hampshire is probably the other state that is the farthest along on this topic. They've actually passed a law around creating a licensure around this, and now we're working as part of a task force to create the nuts and bolts behind it, and they're having similar conversations as you. The key component of having these individuals perform duties and tasks that they have not necessarily done before, not that they couldn't do them before, but we're looking at changing the way pharmacists are working, is ensuring that they are competent and knowledgeable at those skills that you want them to perform. I think there may have been one little blurb in here on the immunization piece that says they have to have validated that they have training. Why are we specifically calling out that just for immunizations? If you want them to do product verification, if you want them to do immunizations, if you want them to do, you know, transferring or accepting of new orders, why not state that the pharmacist or the PIC or the employer even is in charge of documenting that they have the necessary training? That can be one-on-one training with the pharmacist. It's kind of, you know, we're seeing people kind of leave it open. We, of course, are working along with other organizations to create those training modules per se. They can be seen as a form of continuing education, or hopefully more for a higher level of really career advancement and higher education for these individuals. So that is something we really think that we encourage you to think about, because you don't have anything that specifically says you must understand or be validated that you are competent to do these skills that we are allowing you to do. So that could also ease, hopefully, not to put more stress on the PIC or the pharmacist, but ease their kind of fear at this point as well. In terms of the education requirements, you mentioned associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. We're in support of the associate's degree. We don't feel like a bachelor's degree brings any additional knowledge or value to the pharmacy workforce themselves for the knowledge and skills that they need. We really think certification, I know you talked about, that was part of one of the options previously in the language of either having this education or certification be an option. We, of course, support that. There are currently about 58% of your current pharmacy technicians working in the state of California are certified already, because you have either a training program requirement or certification requirement. 58%, and I can get you numbers specifically. So I know we want to reduce regulation and not increase burden, but that may also play into your conversations around ratio. There's been numerous states and precedent throughout the country of when a state or a board of pharmacy is addressing pharm tech ratio issues, when certification becomes a requirement, or in this case, I mean, most of the time it's a minimal requirement to entry into the profession. It proves their minimal competency to perform the role, that they just do away with ratios altogether. So the certification piece takes care of that. That is also something that we advocate for the advanced pharm tech. You're looking at wanting to segment this population of individuals to perform at a higher level, to be seen as a mid-level practitioner in the pharmacy space. Let's hold them to that higher standard, and we suggest having certification as a minimum requirement for that versus educational requirements. And I believe that's all. Do you guys have any questions?
I'll just if I can just respond to a couple of things that happened at the stakeholder meeting. The documentation, training, or competency and the applicable advanced practice skills being performed. Kind of what we heard from the stakeholders was that they did not want that put in place, because they felt like the employer, that was the job of the employer, is to make sure that we're not mandating advanced technician. It's it's, at the employer's site, and it's at the pharmacist's discretion that they allow these things to happen. So, I mean, I can be an advanced practice pharmacist, and that doesn't mean if I, as a PIC, if I don't want you to practice that way, you don't get to practice that way. In an effort to, maybe not over-regulate, we felt like that was the employer's discretion, that it was their training and competency.
So what you're saying, the pharmacist on duty could say that if I don't feel confident this advanced technician could perform the duty, I could say they cannot allow to do that?
Absolutely.
But the reality of that, to me, is zero. That the pharmacist is going to be able to do that. I don't, and unless it's an independent pharmacy.
Yeah, this is not, just because I'm advanced practice tech, it's just like in your pharmacy, you might have someone apply that is a technician, but you don't have an opening for a technician, so you might let them come in as a pharmacy clerk and then earn their way into the technician role. This would be the same sort of thing.
They put a lot of pressure on the pharmacists on duty that, to allow them to do those tasks.
But if the proper education and training is being documented, so for example.
It really is not a choice. Not when you work for someone, that is not a choice. You're the pharmacist back there, and that's what you're going to be, that's what's going to be demanded of you. It is not a choice, unless you work in an independent setting.
Did you have another comment? Because I wanted to ask you a question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like they mentioned all the documented data and statistics around technician product verification, and there are chains that are instituting that, within their organizations. Obviously, there is more capability of that happening in independent and community pharmacy settings versus large retail, but it is deemed successful and, as they mentioned, even more accurate than a pharmacist doing final product verification. There's lots of data on it. And that's just one area of an advanced practice technician could potentially do.
So can we put a provision in there if the pharmacist, disagree with the PIC or whatever, the owner or whatever, that they feel the technician is not qualified and not allow them to do certain duty? And if that pharmacist get fired or lay off, I mean, can they file a complaint to the board of pharmacy? Can they be protected?
I don't see that working. I just don't see that.
I don't understand what that complaint would be. Basically, the complaint would be the pharmacist in charge knew I was incompetent, and I am going to attest to that in front of the Board of Pharmacy and try to hold the PIC liable. I don't think that scenario would happen.
What will happen?
The reality is we also see these cases, and we see the PIC license being at risk. And so, I just don't see that's going to be a choice for the pharmacists in certain environments.
I had some follow-up questions for the public member. I had some follow-up questions for the public member before we go on to other topics. Thank you for your thoughtful presentation. I thought you made a valid point about the 1-year experience versus either a 2-year experience or one renewal cycle. I think that was one issue that could merit some further discussion by the board. The other item that I just wanted to comment on was your concept about certification and training and documentation was really good, but I wouldn't use immunization as the example for that, because in the state, pharmacists are required to go through specialized training for immunization. So that was the only other thing just to clarify with you. But your point is a good one also.
And we support that. We want, our goal is to think of an advanced practice technician to have designated or be able to earn designated credentials similarly to a pharmacist. So if I have gone through maybe a national immunization training program that's been approved by,
and that's
organizations that we trust, right? That I could take that portable where in any state that allows that to happen, and it would be recognized and accepted, and I would be able to perform those duties in those particular states. We're just trying to be forward thinking, because we're seeing now individual states start to talk like this, and we We want to try and keep it to where, it's somewhat sustainable for technicians as they may or may not, move across state lines.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the current regulation as written covers that issue. But I think that as the board starts talking about other parts of the proposed regulations, one of the issues to come back to that you made a really good point about is the number of hours or years of experience that would be minimum.
This is pretty important issue. I think we could delay one more meeting and then give the stakeholder some opinion, and then we can make the final decision. I propose that we delay this.
I do appreciate what you added.
Thank you. And also to note, we partner with California Pharmacists Association, so if I'm not physically available at the stakeholder meetings, our information is shared through Danny and his team. So just to let you know, we've been following this, and they've had our comments along the way, and we'll continue to provide those as necessary. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment?
Lisa Gunther Lum, President of the California Society of Health System Pharmacists. I wanted to bring to your attention a letter that CSHP submitted late last week. I'm not sure if you all had a chance to read it. I brought copies just in case you haven't. But
We actually did. I think, Ann, you sent it out to everybody, right?
Did you send it out?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, we
thank
saw
you.
it. We all saw it.
Thank you. So basically, CSHP respectfully is opposed to creating a new licensee category of advanced pharmacy technician.
And, we asked, you had a representative at the stakeholder meeting, and we asked, because that was asked at the stakeholder meeting, we asked, please send us a letter and tell us why.
Mm-hmm. And you received a letter.
So why?
Oh, why? Because it's not in alignment with the concepts of current practice and may generate some unanticipated outcomes, such as restrictions on the use of pharmacist support personnel. And so we wanted to propose more discussion around this topic, and CSHP is willing to offer our assistance in convening a forum for interested parties to discuss the issues and implications.
So, I think part of the reason we even bring this, that this has even gained traction, is because of the changing roles of pharmacy and the expanded practice of pharmacists. But CSHP, you don't feel like this is a way to support the pharmacists?
With the way it's written at this time, no. I think we need to make some amendments.
And I guess, we got that at the stakeholder meeting, and we asked for specifics. What's wrong?
So many of them are what the prior speaker was talking about. Of concern was the short requirement on training and education, the short amount of practice, as well as some of the specific tasks that were in there, such as transferring or accepting transfer of prescriptions. Those are some of our main areas of concern.
So your main issues is the number of hours of training and the transferring of prescriptions?
Those are the main issues, yeah.
Those are
But
the main
there are
issues.
others as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's all. Just clarification.
Thank you.
My main concern is the liability of the pharmacist.
Yes, I have a problem also with the indirect supervision and yet liability.
Steve Gray is a...
Just before you speak, and the liability thing has come up by actually two of the committee members, but we also have talked about it in the committee, that there would be, that there is a shift in liability for the advanced practice technician would assume some responsibility. Can you just kind of review that for us?
Yes, because unfortunately I was out sick and I probably didn't get to hear that.
So
Okay.
I think that one of the comments that we've previously contemplated is the difference between a pharmacy technician and the proposed advanced pharmacy technician. And the concern that we've heard is that pharmacists are held responsible for the errors that occur that a pharmacy technician may be responsible for, and that is because of the level of supervision required under the law. So a pharmacy technician operates under the direct supervision and control of a pharmacist. Under this proposal, the advanced pharmacy technician is not working under the direct supervision and control, so they are acting in a far more autonomous capacity with a defined scope. And so with that, if errors occur, I'm not an attorney, right? The liability then is on at least but if the advanced tech is making an error, they're responsible for the error. I would liken it, I guess, a little bit to a pharmacist in charge is responsible for overall pharmacy operations, right? And so they might not be the one to, I don't know, steal the drugs or whatever, right? But they do have a share in the liability of it because they're responsible for the, but in this context, the liability is shifting from solely the pharmacist, where they are supervising a pharmacy technician under direct supervision and control, to the advanced pharmacy technician. Now, there might be some co-sharing of the liability, right? But in general terms, because they have this independent scope of practice, and I think that they talked about, insurance might be necessary, whatever else, but there is liability now on these individuals, and maybe counsel can, yeah.
I want to be clear that Ms. Sodergren would be talking about the liability that would lead to a basis for discipline. We're not talking about civil liability, correct?
We are.
So I think where the board is concerned, or the question is, and where I've heard it in the past, is specific to it's more the outcome of the ramifications to the person's license.
When we talk about liability, I just want to be clear that we're not talking about any kind of civil liability that would be determined in a civil forum, correct?
I think we are talking about civil liability.
Yeah, I mean.
Absolutely.
If a pharmacist.
Yeah, they get sued.
Well, and with their license on the line. I mean, the license is also on the line. I can't imagine this indirect supervision. Someone's taking a prescription. I can't hear what's being said, but I'm responsible. This indirect supervision, but yet I'm responsible. My license is on the line. I personally have a problem with that.
Steve Gray, as an individual, just to comment, I was the person that was referred to at the earlier meeting where this was discussed. I pointed out in oral presentation many specifics that we had concerns about. There was a request for letters. Letters between that time period of that meeting and this meeting, with the late presentation of the materials upon which we know what's going to be presented, is difficult for organizations to work on that kind of a time frame, and don't reflect the long discussions that we've had for 10 or 15 years, of which I've probably been one of the primarily continuous parts of those discussions. Originally, the concern about not having hospital and outpatient pharmacy differences was all around sterile compounding. The one presentation was that, well, hospitals always do sterile compounding, so they should have another level of technician that is required to have that training. And it was pointed out that also community pharmacies, home infusion pharmacies, now specialty pharmacies, which didn't exist back then to any degree, also have sterile compounding. So that's been addressed. It's been addressed by ACPE and it's been addressed by PTCB, where they've changed their certification. But there are other things that that have happened since then that make the differences between hospital and community. For an example, in 2014, there was Bill 1039, which the legislature authorized pharmacy technicians to do things in the hospital, such as nursing unit inspections, that before were limited only to pharmacists. And now, under general supervision, current pharmacy technicians can do nursing unit inspections. And second, one of my concerns was that this is a major change in terms of board policy and direction over the years. Up to this point, pharmacy technicians in California have only been personnel that support pharmacists required a license when they are preparing a product, either for dispensing or distribution or repackaging. Those are the specific things in the law now that require a person to have a pharmacy technician license. This proposal vastly expands that now, where a person is going to have a license in order to contact patients. A person is going to have a license in order to contact doctors' offices just to get a refill. Currently, under the law, any non-licensed personnel at the direction of a pharmacist can contact a doctor's office or a prescriber's office for refill authorization. So that alone represents some confusion about what this is a major change in board direction and policy by requiring personnel that support pharmacy to be licensed that heretofore have not been licensed for the tasks they are doing. In the meantime, for an example, it's not clear in this whether a nurse, an LVN or something that is working with the pharmacist can also contact the prescriber's office, can contact the patient after discharge, or do they have to also get, because they're working with a pharmacist in a pharmacy, do they also have to get an advanced pharmacy technician license?
So
several hospitals, wait a minute, please. Several hospitals have for 20 years used LVNs, RNs, and others to assist the pharmacist in these duties because it was something that the hospital, the pharmacies in some cases felt confident. Outpatient pharmacies have hired LVNs, technicians, and so forth who are familiar with medical office procedures to work in that capacity to assist them without them having to necessarily be licensed because they weren't doing anything to prepare a product for dispensing or for distribution. So there's some major policy things wrapped up in here, and we just expressed at that time, and CSHP expressed in a formal letter, that yes, we appreciate all the discussion, but it is because it's gone on for so long that things are changed, and the board is, the proposal from the committee is to pursue legislative changes in this session, I presume, of the legislature to make major changes in board authority, policy, and direction. And we respectfully say that, you know, we don't think that the timing is right and that the information that is provided is up to date regarding pharmacy practice in the current situation. Those are some of the things, besides some specifics, more specifics that we talked about at the committee.
And I think at the committee meeting, we discussed quite a few of those things that you talked about, the LVN, the people making phone calls.
Right.
That currently, they're under the direct supervision of the pharmacist. And this is under the, you know, independent. So we're talking apples and oranges. So just because we're saying a advanced practice technician can do these duties, we're not saying these people over here can't do them. We're just saying these people can do them, and they don't have to be under the direct supervision of the pharmacist. All those people do, like the LVN, all those people you mentioned are under the direct supervision of the pharmacist.
It gets down to confusion about what you mean by direct supervision. The current definition in pharmacy law is that supervision requires the pharmacist to be in the facility and aware. It doesn't mean that they have to be right there looking over their shoulder watching them do it. This is very important for hospitals, for an example. You know, a long time ago we established that that definition was actually changed by the board to recognize that hospital practice, for an example, the pharmacist needs to be up on the floor most of the time, and the technicians can be down in the IV room making IVs as long as the pharmacist comes down and does the final check before it goes up to the patient for administration. We've now introduced a new definition which under other law, not pharmacy law, would be referred to as immediate supervision in the way you talk about it. So pharmacy technicians now don't always have direct supervision in the sense that you have, and so you've really changed that. I also respectfully agree with counsel. There is confusion about when people come to this table or people speak from your table about liability. There are, generally speaking, 3 types of liability that pharmacists incur. There is regulatory liability or administrative liability against the license. There's civil liability, but there's also criminal liability. Pharmacists have been prosecuted criminally for mistakes that technicians have made, that they were held criminally responsible for.
But I think this board only can do discipline, right? We aren't part of the other ones, and so I think that's what counsel's point was.
But if the language infers that you're going to hold
Do you agree, counsel, that the language infers that we are now taking on criminal and civil liability?
I just wanted to be clear, when we were talking about liability, we were really just talking about within the administrative forum. We're not talking
when
about
you were
anything
talking
else,
about
just-
liability, but I think the audience has come forward and saying that's not the only liability we're concerned about.
Steve, what is your recommendation?
My recommendation is, again, that the board not pursue legislation during this session, that we do reactivate the discussions through a forum, and as the letter says, CSHP is willing to help convene that forum, and let's get current input that is relevant to what the statutes say now and what the practice say now, because it's gone on too long for this to be a relevant proposal at this time in many ways. And and there is some doubt, I think serious doubt among people that even if you did introduce legislation, it's probably going to be put off till next year anyway. It's a second year of a legislative session. It's late in that year to get brand new concepts, et cetera.
I think we just need a vote.
Thank you. Okay.
I did have a motion. Any second?
Well, no. We have a motion already on the
What's the
table.
motion?
And then once we...
There's a
get done
committee
that
motion, but we still have public comment, so.
So I'm going to keep
But
this
we are going to have to start limiting it soon.
I'm going to keep this really quick and just to the new item, which is on the issue of ratios. First, I just want to personally congratulate Ann on the long overdue promotion to executive officer.
So I do want to say we're not talking about ratios yet.
Oh, okay. You want me to hold that on
hold
the
that.
new
we haven't gotten there yet.
Sure.
Okay.
I don't know.
Hi, I'll be quick. Okay, so my name is Lenore Swan. I am a military-trained pharmacy technician. I've been a technician a really, really long time. And so part of the problem and the pushback that I'm hearing is because there's no standard education for pharmacy technicians, and that's the problem. I mean, probably some of you, if not all of you, are aware that military-trained pharmacy technicians came into being in the 40s because there weren't enough pharmacists to go around.
Right.
And so for every military installation, submarine, naval battleship, there's not a pharmacist there, there's a pharmacy technician, there's a me there. And so what happens in that situation is that you learn to work with your prescribers, because there's not always a doctor there. Sometimes there is a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant. So the difference is that you learn to stay in your lane. Okay, you learn to stay in your lane, and when there's a question that comes up, you refer back to your prescriber. And the question about length of time, I also think that 2,050 hours is not enough time. I mean, even as a military-trained pharmacy technician, the first year that I worked, I don't know, I probably wouldn't be like 100% comfortable. I would be more comfortable with a person that had maybe 3 years, and not 3 years in one environment, but 3 years spanning, retail, hospital, compounding, mail order, any of those things, so that the person is well-rounded, and so that that individual would have by that time gained the trust of the pharmacists that they're working with, so that they don't have to worry that, oh my gosh, this person it doesn't have good judgment. You have to spend enough time in enough practice areas to develop the good judgment to know when you should seek advice from your prescriber or whatever. So the other thing too, about the bachelor's degree. I don't agree with the bachelor's degree thing, because anybody could get a bachelor's degree in anything and still be a pharmacy technician, and I don't think that's right. The person has to have specific training, specific for pharmacy technicians, and if they're going to, if you're going to look at something like a bachelor's degree, then it should be something along the line of the business of pharmacy, so that the technician can then do more administrative tasks and free the pharmacist to do the clinical stuff. So anything that the state, that the law does not require that a pharmacist do, a technician can do that. And there's a lot of that. And I have many friends who are pharmacists who are just burnt out. I mean, they're just like sick of it. And they would like for technicians to be able to do more things. So California, you're kind of in the front, which I appreciate, living here. But a little tweaking, I think, is in order. Thank you.
Are you teaching now?
I just started my own business, so and that is one of the things I do is performance deficit correction.
Oh.
Because proprietary schools do a horrible job. And that's why retail pharmacists and the other pharmacists here are not comfortable with technicians having more responsibility, because they're just not well trained. That's the problem. What this country needs is standardized technician education, and the Department of Defense has been doing it for 60 years.
Yes.
So why can't that be the standard? Just asking.
Interesting.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mark Johnson, CVS Health. I'll be quiet because I have sat here for countless hours over the last couple of years, and I just wanted to thank the board for their good work in the proposal that came forward today. It's unfortunate to hear all the Johnny-come-latelys and the what-if naysayers, and we've had all these conversations in the past, and they seem to be dominating this table in the last hour. So I wanted to come forward in support, realizing that all the people that spoke before me probably have pretty big pull at the legislature. If the board did decide not to move forward with this, I would suggest maybe considering rulemaking and expanding some of these practice for current technicians where they might not have as much pull. Thank you for your good work.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other public comments? Thank you.
All right, we have 2 board members that have left. Do we still have a quorum?
We still have a quorum or not?
That's what I'm asking you.
2, 4. Yeah, we still have a quorum. I mean, we have 7.
Okay.
So it's back to you.
So the committee there was a motion that was the committee's motion, so it did not require a second, and that was to move forward with the language that we presented.
Okay, can you repeat it now that we...
So the motion is move the proposal to the board with the discussed changes and provide authority for the chair of the committee to work with staff and council to refine the language and seek guidance from the board on how to address the ratio issue. But actually, we cut out that last part because we divided the ratio into another issue. So let's move the proposal of the board with the discussion changes and provide authority for the, just say with the discussed changes, which are removing the provision related to verifying accuracy, incorporating training requirements, administration of immunization, correcting the fee of the hospitals. And it's basically what is in attachment 2. That's what the committee is proposing.
So by doing this, are we approving the advanced pharmacy technician? Or are we just approving discussion, opportunity to,
I think we're moving it forward.
we're doing that. That's what this is all about.
Is that correct, Ann?
So I believe that the motion is intended to finalize a statutory proposal to then pursue legislation.
For the advanced pharmacy technician.
However, considering the liability questions and the training, number of training hours, I want to say to the board that I'm going to vote against it.
Well, I think,
I just wanted to get that out there.
yeah.
Understood.
But I was thinking that the liability was, we don't have to have because at one point we had a line specifically about liability, and I thought we were advised that we should take that out.
Well, I think the hours is a major thing.
Yeah, the hours
Okay.
is-
So I think that kind of affects it.
So we're going to,
So-
Cheryl, we're voting on the committee recommendation, which is that
Voting
the
on
language that's
Moving
here.
it forward or not moving it forward. So we're voting whether to move it forward, okay? So, and Alan
Move it
just
forward
stated
as
that
presented.
He's going to vote against it because, two reasons. The hours aren't enough. The 2,050 hours aren't enough, in his opinion.
Already, I can tell you, I
Yeah.
agree with Alan's position.
Okay, anyway, so let's vote, okay?
All right.
All those in favor of moving this forward, raise your hands. Okay, unanimous that we're not moving forward. Okay.
Was there,
so-
but I know Albert had
No, we're not
another,
moving
had a
forward.
motion, and I think, Alan, you have possibly a motion?
I beg your pardon?
Do you have a motion?
Yeah, do we have a?
Well, okay, I know Albert has a
Well,
motion.
since, like I say, since this is such a big thing, I think, so important, I think we could just do, I mean, what's the hurry? I mean, you know.
So we're going to send it back to committee?
Yeah, if I have a motion, it's to send it back to committee for further consideration, considering the public comment.
Okay, do we have a second on that?
I second.
Okay,
Do we even need to do that?
we don't need to do
I mean,
it?
since we voted it down, doesn't it automatically go back to the committee? I don't know, I'm just asking.
Does it automatically go back to me? Oh, it's up to that chair.
No, it
Chair
would not
knows.
automatically go back
We
to
have to
committee
send it
because
back.
you could decide that you're not proceeding with it at all. So if you want to send it back to committee, then you should probably provide some direction on that, and potentially if you want to set parameters on, or not parameters, at least a minimum of what you want the committee to determine or
Yeah,
decide.
I think
or
it'd be helpful for the
discuss.
committee if we're going to, I welcome it coming back to the committee. But I don't know if you want to add in like any specific things you want us to add in.
Well,
So Albert is making the motion.
Yeah, I motion it to go back to committee, and then we could have more discussion on, and then,
I mean, is there anything specific you want us to?
well, like I say, my biggest concern is the liability, because it's I mean,
Okay, so address liability.
Liability, yes.
Do you want to address the hours?
I let Alan do that.
Well, no, I mean, let's make it all part of the.
Yeah, we could consider hour and qualification and the liability.
okay, that's
And
your
then,
motion.
was there a second?
Is there a second?
Yeah, I second.
Cheryl, second.
How about discussion?
Yes.
Because I would suggest that the motion be broad enough that that's not limiting the committee to only talk about those issues.
You know what, I agree with that.
That would be those including others that may come up.
Yes, yeah,
Thank you.
go ahead, I agree. I agree.
Others that would.
Right.
Okay. Is there
Okay,
any
the
public
second
comment?
agrees to that.
I second.
Is there any
Please,
public
more
comment?
Is there any additional comment? Support, okay. All right, all those in favor of the motion, raise your hands. Unanimous? Looks unanimous to me. Okay.
So I think with that, then we don't
Coming
need to
back
go
to
into
you.
the next, do we need guidance, Ann, on
You don't
the
need to go to
the
the
ratio piece, or what do you want to do as far as the?
I think that's up to the board to decide.
I don't think we need to do anything with it since it's going back to the committee anyway.
So you want the committee to talk more about ratio? Okay, that's fine.
Very good.
So let me just finish up here?
Yep.
Okay. Licensing statistics for July 1st, 2019 through December 31st, 2019 are provided in attachment 3, and let's go through it line by line because it's almost 6 o'clock, and I know everyone would like to do that rather than have a cocktail. Just kidding. So please look at the attachment 3, and if you have any questions, let us know. The committee continues to monitor processing times, because I know that that's a very hot topic for the public, is the processing times, and information on the processing times is also included in the material. Unfortunately, the processing time for the initial application and deficiency mail for some license types are outside the board's performance standards of 30 days for initial application and 10 days for deficiencies. The board continues to be challenged with 4 vacancies in licensing, which impacts meeting the standard performance processing. And I do know that management is currently, redirecting and trying to put everybody on board to address it the best they can. We hear you. Reach out if it's creating a problem, because we'll try to work with you. Any public comment on licensing statistics or processing times? Sorry, so we aren't talking about ratio, so for another day. Future meetings, our next scheduled meeting is May 6th, which I think is the next board meeting. I anticipate that we're going to come up with a date for a licensing committee probably within the next month or 2, so that we can hopefully nail this down. So although it's May 6th, please sit on the edge of your seat. We'll release a new date. And we'll even try to do it possibly tomorrow if we can get all of our heads together and find a date.
Does that conclude your report?
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you. Given the time, I recommend that we recess for the day, and we will resume tomorrow at 9. Thank you for coming and participating.
Let's try to figure out a date.
Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.